When Elena Hart walked away from her wedding altar, she thought she'd lost everything: her future, her family, her home. But on the coldest night of her life, sitting abandoned in a ruined wedding dress on the streets of Miami, she discovered something far more dangerous than heartbreak: the city's most feared crime boss standing in the shadows, offering her a choice that would either destroy her completely or set her free. This is the story of a woman who refused to be traded like property, who stood between two warring empires, and who chose her own fate when everyone else tried to write it for them. Stay with me until the end of this journey, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Elena's story travels across the world. The wedding dress had cost $23,000. Elena Hart remembered the exact number because her father had reminded her of it 17 times during the fitting, each mention a brick added to the invisible cage being built around her future. Now, sitting on the frozen stone steps of a downtown Miami parking garage at 11:47 on a Saturday night in January, the dress felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Every bead, every crystal, every hand-stitched seam, a reminder of the beautiful lie she'd almost lived. The temperature had dropped to 42 degrees, unseasonably cold for Miami, and Elena's breath came out in small white clouds that disappeared into the night. Her bare shoulders were covered in goosebumps, her skin turning purple-pink in the fluorescent security lights that hummed overhead. The train of her dress, once pristine ivory silk, was now gray with dirt and oil stains from the parking garage floor. She'd stopped caring about it 3 hours ago. 3 hours. That's how long it had been since she'd walked out of the street. Regis Hotel, past 500 gasping guests, past her sobbing mother and stone-faced father, past the ice sculptures and the 10-tier cake, and the chamber orchestra that had fallen silent mid-song. 3 hours since she'd discovered Marcus Chen, her fiancé of 2 years, the man she'd convinced herself to love, in a supply closet with her sister Vanessa, his hands tangled in her hair, her lipstick smeared across his mouth, both of them laughing like teenagers who'd gotten away with stealing something precious. They hadn't heard her approach. The door had been slightly ajar, and Elena had been looking for the wedding coordinator to ask about the timing of the first dance. Instead, she'd found her future crumbling in real time. "God, I can't wait until this circus is over," Marcus had said, his voice muffled against Vanessa's neck. "2 more hours of playing devoted groom, then we can go back to normal." Vanessa had laughed, that high, tinkling laugh that had always made Elena feel somehow less than. "She actually believes you love her. It's almost sad." Love? Marcus had pulled back, and Elena had seen his face clearly through the crack in the door. "I love her father's connections to the Port Authority. I love the fact that marrying a Hart gives me legitimacy with the city council. I love that this wedding contract gives me access to shipping routes my family's been trying to control for 20 years. But Elena?" He'd shrugged. "She's a means to an end, a very profitable end." Elena had stood frozen, her hand on the door handle, her brain trying to process words that made no sense. A contract. Shipping routes. Means to an end. "And when the contract expires?" Vanessa had asked, running her fingers down his chest. Marcus had smiled, that same smile he'd given Elena 1,000 times when he told her she was beautiful, that he couldn't wait to make her his wife, that they were going to build something meaningful together. "Standard business practice, sweetheart. When something stops being useful, you liquidate the asset and move on to better opportunities." That's when Elena had pushed the door open. The memory of what happened next was a blur of raised voices, Vanessa's fake tears, Marcus trying to spin a story about Elena misunderstanding what she'd seen. Her father had appeared, his face red with anger, not at Marcus, but at Elena, for causing a scene and jeopardizing a very important business arrangement. Her mother had begged her to just go through with the ceremony, to work out the details later in private, like civilized people. But something had broken inside Elena in that supply closet, some fundamental understanding of who she was and what she was worth. And when her father had gripped her arm and hissed, "Get back out there and smile or you'll destroy everything I've built," she'd looked him in the eye and said the first true thing she'd spoken in 2 years. "No." Then she'd walked, out of the hotel, past the valet stand, down 3 blocks of Miami's financial district in her $23,000 dress and her 4-inch heels until her feet had started bleeding. She'd kicked off the shoes somewhere around the 2nd block. By the 3rd, she'd stopped feeling the cold. She'd ended up here, at this parking garage, because it was the first place she'd found with steps where she could sit down, and her legs had simply refused to carry her any further. That had been 3 hours ago, and in that time she'd watched the city move around her, cars passing, people laughing as they left bars and restaurants, the distant sound of music from the clubs on Ocean Drive. Normal life, continuing on as though her entire world hadn't just collapsed. Her phone had died an hour ago, which was fine because it had been vibrating nonstop anyway. 17 missed calls from her father, 32 texts from her mother, nothing from Marcus, which somehow hurt worse than everything else. Even her sister had texted once. "You're being dramatic. Come back and fix this." Fix this. As though the problem was Elena's reaction, not the betrayal itself. She pulled her knees up to her chest, trying to preserve what little warmth she had left, and stared out at the Miami skyline. Somewhere in one of those gleaming towers, Marcus was probably already working on damage control, spinning the story to make himself the victim. Somewhere else, her father was calculating how much money he'd lost on this failed merger. Because that's what it had been, really. Not a wedding, a merger. And Elena had been the contract neither party intended to honor. You know, most runaway brides end up in Las Vegas or Mexico. Parking garages are a less popular choice. The voice came from behind her, deep and smooth with the faintest trace of an accent Elena couldn't quite place. She didn't turn around. Some part of her brain registered that she should probably be afraid. Alone, vulnerable, dressed like an advertisement for Easy Target, but she'd used up all her fear in the last 3 hours. She had nothing left. "I'm not a runaway bride," she said to the night sky. "I'm just a bride who stopped running in the wrong direction." Footsteps approached, slow and deliberate, the kind of walk that belonged to someone who'd never hurried for anything in their life. Then a figure moved into her peripheral vision, and Elena finally looked up. The man was tall, 6'2", maybe 6'3", with dark hair that fell slightly into his eyes, and a face that looked like it had been carved from marble by someone who understood that beauty could be dangerous. He wore an expensive charcoal suit that fit him like it had been made specifically for his body, a black overcoat that probably cost more than her dress, and shoes so polished they reflected the security lights. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, gray like smoke, sharp and assessing, the kind of eyes that saw everything and revealed nothing. He was holding a steaming cup of coffee in one hand and what looked like a men's jacket in the other. "Dominic Vale," he said, not offering his hand, just acknowledging his own existence like it was a fact she should know. "And you're Elena Hart, though I'm guessing you're regretting that last name about now." Elena blinked. She knew that name. Everyone in Miami knew that name. Dominic Vale ran the city's most sophisticated criminal empire. Shipping, real estate, import-export businesses that everyone knew meant drugs and weapons and whatever else people with money and no morals wanted moved quietly from place to place. He was untouchable, invisible, and absolutely terrifying to anyone with sense. "I'm not interested in whatever you're selling," she said, her voice coming out more tired than afraid. "And I don't have anything worth taking. So unless you're here to kill me, which would honestly be a mercy at this point, I'd appreciate being left alone." Something flickered in his expression. Amusement, maybe, or surprise. He set the coffee down on the step beside her and draped the jacket over her shoulders. It was warm, cashmere, and smelled like expensive cologne and something darker, like wood smoke and whiskey. "Not selling anything," he said, sitting down 2 steps below her so he had to turn slightly to look at her face. "And definitely not here to kill you, though I'm concerned that you presented it as an option with such enthusiasm." He paused, studying her with those unsettling gray eyes. "I'm here because I was having dinner across the street, saw you sitting out here and thought, that's either the saddest art installation Miami's ever produced, or someone's having the worst night of their life." Despite everything, Elena felt a small broken laugh escape. "Art installation, that's one way to put it. What's another way?" She pulled his jacket tighter around her shoulders, absorbing the warmth like a lifeline. A very expensive mistake, realizing she's worth less than the shipping routes her marriage was supposed to secure. Dominic's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air between them. "Marcus Chen," he said, and it wasn't a question. "I heard he was getting married tonight. Big society wedding, lots of important people. Very strategic alliance between the Hart family's legitimate port operations and the Chen family's less legitimate interests." You're well informed. I make it my business to know who's doing business in my city. He picked up the coffee and offered it to her. Drink this. Hypothermia isn't romantic, it's just stupid. And you don't strike me as stupid. Elena took the cup, wrapping her frozen fingers around the warmth. You don't know me. I know you walked away from a wedding that was probably 5 years in the planning. I know you're sitting in a parking garage in January instead of on a honeymoon in Bali or wherever people like you go to pretend they're happy. And I know Marcus Chen is currently telling everyone at the St. Regis that you had a nervous breakdown and the wedding will be rescheduled once you've received proper medical attention. Elena's head snapped up. What? His exact words, according to my source, who's still at the reception. Dominic's voice was casual, but his eyes had gone cold. Apparently, you're fragile and overwhelmed by the pressure of joining two prominent families. Very sympathetic spin. Makes him look patient and understanding. Makes you look unstable. The coffee cup shook in Elena's hands. That son of a... He's also telling people the wedding contract is still valid, that this is just a temporary delay, and that he's confident you'll come to your senses within the week. Dominic leaned back against the step, crossing his arms. Is that true? Is the contract still valid? Elena stared at him. Why do you care? Because Marcus Chen is a parasite who's been trying to muscle into my territory for the last 18 months, using his engagement to you as social capital to legitimize operations that are anything but legitimate. Because your father's shipping company handles 40% of the cargo that moves through the port of Miami, and if the Chen family gets control of that through marriage, it shifts the entire power balance of this city. And because... He paused, his gaze sharpening. I really don't like men who treat women like assets on a balance sheet. That's rich, coming from a crime boss. Crime boss. He smiled, showing teeth. Is that what they're calling me now? I prefer independent businessman with diverse interests. You're a criminal. I'm an entrepreneur operating in markets with artificial regulatory constraints. He shrugged. Semantics. But I've never traded a woman like property, and I've put a bullet in the head of every man in my organization who's tried. So whatever you think you know about me, understand that there are lines even I don't cross. Elena wanted to argue, to tell him that his moral high ground was built on a foundation of blood and money and violence. But sitting there in the cold, wearing his jacket and drinking his coffee, while the man she'd almost married rewrote history to suit his narrative, she found she didn't have the energy for righteous indignation. The contract expires if the marriage doesn't happen within 6 months of the engagement, she said quietly. We've been engaged for 2 years. Marcus kept pushing back the date. I thought it was because he wanted everything perfect. Now I realize he was just maximizing the value of the arrangement before closing the deal. Smart girl. Stupid girl, Elena corrected. I believed every word he said. I thought... Her voice cracked. I thought someone actually wanted me. Not my family's connections, not my father's business, not the social status or the political access, just me. Dominic was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its sardonic edge. Want to know what I think? Not particularly. I think you're the first honest thing that's happened in this city in a long time. He stood up, brushing off his pants, and looked down at her with an expression she couldn't read. I think Marcus Chen is a fool who doesn't understand the difference between value and worth. And I think you're sitting in this parking garage because you finally figured out that being alone is better than being with people who make you feel alone. Elena's throat tightened. She didn't trust herself to speak. Dominic reached into his coat and pulled out a business card. Simple, cream-colored, with just a phone number embossed in gold. He placed it on the step beside her. I'm going to make you an offer, Elena Hart, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. I told you, I'm not interested. I can make Marcus Chen's contract worthless. I can make sure he never uses your name or your family's business for his schemes again. I can protect you from whatever retaliation your father's planning for embarrassing him in front of Miami's elite. And I can give you the resources to start over. New name, new city, new life, whatever you want. Elena stared at him. Why would you do that? Because it serves my interest to keep the Chen family from expanding their power. Because I enjoy disrupting my enemy's plans. And because... He paused, something almost human flickering across his face. Every once in a while, I like to do something that isn't purely business. What's the catch? Smart question. Dominic smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. The catch is that you'll owe me. Not money, not your family's business, nothing you can't afford to give. Just, let's call it a favor to be named later. And before you ask, no, it won't involve anything illegal, immoral, or dangerous. You have my word. The word of a criminal. The word of a man who's never broken a promise in his life. He started to walk away, then paused and looked back. You have until morning to decide. After that, the offer expires and you're on your own. Choose wisely, Elena. The next few hours determine whether you spend the rest of your life being traded between men like Marcus or whether you finally take control of your own story. He was gone before she could respond, disappearing into the shadows of the parking garage like he'd never been there at all. Elena sat in the cold, staring at the business card, turning his words over in her mind. A favor to be named later. A promise from a crime boss. A chance to escape. Or another cage, prettier but just as confining. She picked up the card, feeling the weight of the heavy paper stock, and slipped it into the bodice of her ruined wedding dress. Then she pulled Dominic's jacket tighter, finished the coffee, and watched the city lights blur through her tears. Somewhere in Miami, Marcus was spinning his lies. Her father was calculating his losses. Vanessa was probably already planning how to position herself as the victim of her sister's instability. The whole machinery of their world was reorganizing around the narrative that Elena was broken, fragile, unable to handle the pressures of the life they'd built for her. But sitting in that parking garage, freezing and alone and more clear-headed than she'd been in 2 years, Elena Hart made a decision. She was done being part of other people's stories. It was time to write her own. The sun rose over Miami at 6:43 in the morning, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that looked almost artificial against the steel-gray buildings of the financial district. Elena watched it from the same steps where she'd spent the night, her body stiff from cold and lack of sleep, her mind sharp with the kind of clarity that only comes from burning away everything you thought you knew. She'd made her decision at some point around 3 in the morning, in that quiet hour when the city finally stops pretending to sleep and admits it's always been awake. The decision hadn't come with fanfare or revelation, just a simple, cold understanding that she had exactly 2 choices. She could go back, apologize to her father, submit to whatever punishment he deemed appropriate, marry Marcus despite everything she now knew, and spend the rest of her life as a beautifully wrapped package passed between powerful men. She'd be comfortable, protected, provided for, and completely, utterly erased. Or she could take Dominic Vale's offer and step into something unknown, dangerous, and entirely her own. The business card was still tucked in her bodice, and Elena pulled it out now, studying it in the growing light. Just a phone number. No name, no address, no promises written in ink, just a choice, represented by 10 digits embossed in gold. She stood up, her legs screaming in protest, and looked down at herself. The wedding dress was destroyed, stained, torn, a monument to everything she was leaving behind. She shrugged out of Dominic's jacket, folded it carefully, and left it on the step where he'd found her. Then she walked barefoot across the parking garage, her ruined dress trailing behind her like a ghost, until she found what she was looking for. A payphone. One of the last relics of an analog age, tucked in the corner by the elevator bank. Elena picked up the receiver, fed in the quarters she'd found in the jacket pocket, and dialed. The phone rang once, twice. On the third ring, a voice answered. Not Dominic, but someone else. A man with a slight Spanish accent and the clipped efficiency of someone used to handling unusual requests. Yes? I need to speak to Dominic Vale, Elena said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. Tell him Elena Hart is ready to accept his offer. A pause. Then, location? Downtown parking garage, corner of 3rd and Flagler. Someone will be there in 15 minutes. Don't move. The line went dead. Elena hung up the phone and leaned against the concrete wall, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. 15 minutes. 15 minutes until her old life ended and something new began. She closed her eyes and thought about Marcus, probably still asleep in whatever hotel room he'd retreated to when the reception finally ended. She thought about her father, already awake and plotting how to salvage his business deal. She thought about her mother who'd stopped calling after the 10th unanswered message. She thought about Vanessa, who'd taken what Elena had valued and treated it like a joke. And she thought about herself, the Elena who'd spent 2 years convincing herself that being chosen was enough, that being wanted for her utility was the same as being loved, that the cold feeling in her chest every time Marcus kissed her was just nervousness about the wedding, that Elena was gone now, left behind in a supply closet at the St. Regis Hotel. The Elena standing in this parking garage was someone different, someone who'd looked at the worst moment of her life and decided it was actually the first moment of her freedom. 13 minutes later, a black Mercedes pulled into the garage. Not ostentatious, not flashy, just expensive enough to indicate wealth without advertising it. The kind of car that moved through the city invisible and untouchable. The back door opened and Dominic Vale stepped out. He'd changed since last night, different suit, this one a shade of blue so dark it was almost black, paired with a crisp white shirt and no tie. He looked like he'd slept well and had a leisurely breakfast, though Elena suspected he'd been awake all night waiting for her call. "Elena Hart," he said, his gray eyes taking in her appearance without judgment. "You look terrible. You look exactly the same as you did 6 hours ago. It's annoying. I'll try to be more disheveled next time we meet." He gestured to the car. "Get in. We have a lot to discuss, and this parking garage is depressing." Elena didn't move. "I need to know something first." "Ask. This favor you're going to ask for someday, will it hurt anyone?" Dominic considered the question, his expression serious. "Not anyone who doesn't deserve it." That's not reassuring. It's honest. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I'm not going to lie to you, Elena. I'm not Marcus, and I'm not your father. I won't tell you pretty stories to make you feel safe. What I will tell you is this. The favor I'll ask will be something only you can provide, something that requires your specific skills or position or knowledge. It won't compromise your safety. It won't violate your morals unless your morals include protecting men like Marcus Chen. And it won't turn you into something you're not." "How can you promise that when you don't even know what you'll ask for?" "Because I know who you are." He held her gaze. "You're the woman who walked away from everything when she realized it was built on lies. You're the woman who spent all night in the cold rather than compromise her dignity. You're the woman who's standing here in a destroyed wedding dress, asking the devil if he keeps his promises, instead of running back to the safety of a gilded cage." He smiled, sharp and knowing. "I'm not interested in breaking women like you. I'm interested in seeing what happens when you finally get a chance to be unbroken." Elena wanted to argue, to find the flaw in his logic, to protect herself from making another terrible mistake. But exhaustion and cold and the weight of the last 12 hours pressed down on her, and all she could think was that at least Dominic Vale's manipulation was honest. At least he wasn't pretending to love her while selling her future to the highest bidder. "Okay," she said quietly. "I accept your offer." Just like that. Just like that. She walked toward the car, her bare feet silent on the concrete. "But I have conditions." "I'm listening." Elena stopped at the open car door and looked back at him. "I don't want a new name or a new city. I want my life back. The one Marcus tried to steal. I want my reputation restored. I want everyone who's currently spinning lies about my breakdown to know the truth about what happened last night. And I want to watch Marcus Chen's world collapse the same way he tried to make mine collapse." Dominic's smile widened, genuine this time, touched with something that looked almost like admiration. "That's not starting over. That's scorched earth. Is that a problem?" "Not even a little bit." He gestured into the car. "Get in, Elena Hart. Let's go ruin some lives." She slid into the back seat, the leather cool against her bare legs, and Dominic got in beside her. The driver, a man with silver hair and the expressionless face of someone who'd seen everything and been surprised by nothing, pulled smoothly out of the garage and into the morning traffic. "Where are we going?" Elena asked. "My office. You need clothes, food, and about 12 hours of sleep, in that order." Dominic pulled out his phone and typed something quickly. "Then we're going to have a very detailed conversation about Marcus Chen's business operations, your father's shipping company, and exactly how we're going to dismantle everything they've built." "Just like that? You're going to destroy 2 of Miami's most powerful families." "I'm going to help you destroy them," Dominic corrected. "There's a difference. What I offer is resources, strategy, and protection. What you offer is insider knowledge, legitimate access, and the moral authority of being the wronged party. Together?" He looked at her, his gray eyes glinting with something predatory. "Together, we're going to remind this city that there are consequences for treating people like commodities." Elena leaned back against the seat, feeling the exhaustion finally catching up with her. "Why are you really doing this? And don't tell me it's just business strategy. You could achieve the same result a dozen different ways without involving me." Dominic was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at the city passing by. When he spoke, his voice had lost its calculated edge. 5 years ago, I was engaged to a woman named Isabella Cortez. Smart, beautiful, ambitious, everything I thought I wanted in a partner. What I didn't know was that her father had arranged the engagement as a way to infiltrate my organization. She was supposed to marry me, learn my operations, and then testify against me in a federal case that would have put me away for life. Elena's breath caught. What happened? She fell in love with me. His jaw tightened. Real love. The kind that made her question everything she'd been raised to believe. 3 weeks before the wedding, she came to me and confessed everything. The plan, her father's involvement, the wire she'd been wearing for 6 months. She offered to disappear, to run, to do whatever it took to protect me. And I called off the wedding, paid her father enough money to retire somewhere tropical, and set Isabella up with a new identity in Seattle. Last I heard, she's running an art gallery and dating a software engineer who thinks she used to work in hotel management. He finally looked at Elena. I let her go because she deserved a choice, a real one, not the illusion of choice her father had given her. So when I saw you last night, sitting in that parking garage in a destroyed wedding dress, I saw someone else who deserved the same thing. The chance to choose. The chance to choose, he agreed. Everything that happens from this point forward is your decision, Elena. I'll offer options, provide resources, suggest strategies. But I won't make you do anything you don't want to do. And if you wake up tomorrow and decide you want to walk away from all of this, I'll give you enough money to start fresh anywhere in the world, and you'll never hear from me again. No favor owed, no strings attached. Elena studied his face, looking for the lie, the manipulation, the hidden agenda. But all she saw was a man who'd spent years building walls around himself, being momentarily honest about what was behind them. That's a terrible business strategy, she said. Probably, he smiled. But I've been told I have a weakness for women who refuse to play by the rules they've been given. The car pulled up to a high-rise building in Brickell, all glass and steel and anonymous wealth. Dominic got out first, then offered Elena his hand. She took it, feeling the strength in his grip, and let him guide her through a private entrance that bypassed the main lobby. They rode the elevator in silence to the 38th floor, where the doors opened directly into a penthouse office that looked more like a luxury apartment than a place of business. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Miami, the ocean to the east, the city sprawling out in all directions, vast and indifferent to the small dramas playing out in its streets. A woman was waiting for them, mid-40s, professional, with kind eyes, and the bearing of someone used to handling crises. Mr. Vale, Ms. Hart, I'm Angela Rodriguez, Mr. Vale's personal assistant. I've prepared the guest suite and taken the liberty of ordering some essentials from Nordstrom based on your approximate size. They should arrive within the hour. Elena blinked. How did you? Angela is very efficient, Dominic said, and slightly terrifying in her ability to anticipate needs. The guest suite is through there. He pointed to a door on the left. Shower, sleep, eat, in whatever order makes sense. We'll talk when you're ready. And if I'm not ready? If I change my mind? He met her eyes, and for a moment Elena saw something in them that looked almost like vulnerability. Then you change your mind. The door isn't locked. You're not a prisoner. You're a guest who's considering a very unusual business proposition. Angela cleared her throat delicately. I should mention that your father has called 17 times in the last hour. He's insistent about speaking with you. Elena's stomach clenched. What did you tell him? That you're unavailable and will return his call at your convenience. Angela's expression didn't change. He was not pleased. I imagine not. Elena looked at Dominic. He's going to come looking for me. Let him. There was steel in Dominic's voice now. Your father doesn't scare me, and neither does Marcus Chen. If they want to find you, they can make an appointment like everyone else. In the meantime, you're under my protection, which means you're untouchable." The word hung in the air between them. Protection. It could mean safety or ownership, sanctuary, or another kind of cage. Elena knew she was trading one form of dependence for another, swapping her father's control for Dominic's patronage. But at least this time, she was making the choice with her eyes open. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll stay, for now." "For now," Dominic agreed. He nodded to Angela. "Make sure she has everything she needs, and cancel my appointments for the rest of the day. I have some research to do on the Chen family's business operations." He disappeared into an inner office, leaving Elena alone with Angela, who smiled with professional warmth. "This way, Miss Hart. Let's get you out of that dress." The guest suite was larger than Elena's childhood bedroom, decorated in shades of cream and gray, with touches of blue that echoed the ocean outside. The bathroom alone was the size of her apartment, all marble and heated floors and a shower that looked like it could fit 6 people comfortably. Angela showed her where everything was, then quietly excused herself, leaving Elena alone for the first time since Dominic had appeared in the parking garage. She peeled off the wedding dress carefully, even though it was ruined beyond repair, and stood in front of the mirror in her underwear and torn stockings. Her makeup had long since smudged into dark circles under her eyes. Her hair had fallen out of its elegant updo into a tangled mess. Her skin was pale from cold and stress. She looked like someone who'd survived a war. Maybe she had. Elena stepped into the shower and turned the water as hot as she could stand, letting it beat down on her shoulders until the bathroom filled with steam, and she couldn't tell if the water on her face was from the shower or from tears. She cried for the life she'd almost had, the lies she'd almost believed, the version of herself she'd almost become. She cried for the girl who'd thought being chosen was enough, who'd mistaken manipulation for love, who'd been willing to settle for comfort over truth. And then, when there were no more tears left, she washed her hair and scrubbed her skin and stood under the water until it finally started to run cold. By the time she emerged, wrapped in a plush robe with a towel around her hair, the clothes had arrived, expensive basics in neutral colors, everything in her exact size. Angela had thought of everything: underwear, jeans, cashmere sweaters, comfortable shoes, even pajamas and a toothbrush still in its package. Elena dressed in black jeans and a soft gray sweater, then padded barefoot into the main living area of the penthouse. Dominic was at his desk, surrounded by papers and laptop screens, his jacket discarded and his shirt sleeves rolled up. He looked up when she entered and did a quick assessment. "Better," he said. "You look almost human again." I feel almost human again." Elena sat down in the chair across from his desk. "Can I ask you something?" "Always. If I agree to help you take down Marcus and my father, what happens afterward? Do I just go back to my life like none of this happened?" Dominic leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Do you want to go back to your life?" "I don't know what I want. 24 hours ago, I thought I wanted to marry Marcus Chen. Clearly, my judgment isn't the most reliable." "Your judgment is fine. Your information was compromised." He closed his laptop and gave her his full attention. "Here's what I think happens afterward. You take control of your life for the first time. Maybe that means working with your family's company on your terms, not your father's. Maybe it means walking away entirely and building something new. Maybe it means something neither of us can predict right now." He paused. "But whatever you choose, it'll be your choice. Not mine, not your father's, not Marcus's, yours. And the favor you'll ask for someday? Still pending. Still your right to refuse if you disagree with it." He pulled out a folder and slid it across the desk. "But first, we have work to do. This is everything I've been able to compile on Marcus Chen's operations in the last 6 hours. I need you to tell me where I'm wrong, what I'm missing, and what vulnerabilities I haven't identified." Elena opened the folder and started reading. What she saw made her blood run cold. Marcus's empire was even darker than she'd imagined. Money laundering through shell companies, human trafficking disguised as labor recruitment, pharmaceutical smuggling routed through legitimate medical supply chains. And woven through all of it, like poison through veins, was her family's shipping company, providing the infrastructure that made it all possible. "My father knew," she whispered, staring at the documents. "He had to know. He knew," Dominic confirmed quietly. The question is, are you ready to do something about it? Elena looked up at him, at this dangerous man who'd offered her a choice when everyone else had tried to make her choices for her. She thought about Marcus, probably still spinning his lies, about her father, who'd been willing to trade her future for shipping contracts, about Vanessa, who'd laughed at her sister's pain, and she thought about the woman in the parking garage last night, freezing and alone, but finally free. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I'm ready. Let's burn it all down." Dominic smiled, sharp and fierce and full of terrible promise. "Then let's get started." The war began not with violence, but with paperwork. Elena spent the next 3 days learning the architecture of her father's betrayal, tracing the lines between legitimate business and criminal enterprise until she understood exactly how deep the corruption ran. Dominic's office became her classroom, his files her textbooks, and every new revelation another nail in the coffin of the life she'd left behind. It turned out that Richard Hart, her father, the man who'd taught her to ride a bike, who'd attended every school play, who'd cried at her high school graduation, had been running a sophisticated smuggling operation through Hart Shipping for the better part of a decade. Legitimate cargo manifests hid containers filled with everything from black market pharmaceuticals to undocumented weapons. Port Authority inspections were conveniently scheduled around high-value shipments, and Marcus Chen's family had been positioning themselves to take over the entire operation through marriage, turning Elena into the ultimate Trojan horse. "Look at this," Dominic said on the third afternoon, pointing to a spreadsheet on one of his monitors. "Every major shipment that moves through your family's routes gets flagged here with a secondary code. The codes correspond to different categories of contraband. Your father's been documenting his own crimes like he's running a legitimate business." Elena leaned over his shoulder, scanning the columns of data. "He always said proper records were the key to success. I guess I understand why now. If you're going to commit crimes, you might as well know exactly which crimes you're committing. Makes prosecution easier, though. All we need is to get these files to the right people." "The right people?" Elena straightened up, crossing her arms. "You mean the FBI? The DEA? People who'll also arrest you for half the things in those files?" Dominic smiled without looking away from the screen. "I'm very good at making sure my name doesn't appear in documentation. Your father, unfortunately, is not. Which brings us to phase 1 of our operation." He pulled up a new window, this one showing what looked like an email draft. Elena read it quickly, her stomach dropping with each line. The email was addressed to Marcus Chen, written in her voice, apologizing for her breakdown at the wedding and suggesting they meet to discuss moving forward with the original arrangement. It was perfect, contrite enough to seem genuine, desperate enough to make Marcus think he'd won, and vague enough to make him curious. "You want to use me as bait," Elena said flatly. "I want to give Marcus exactly what he thinks he wants. A chance to reel you back in, to salvage his deal, to prove to everyone that he's still in control." Dominic finally looked at her. "And while he's busy being smug and victorious, we're going to record every word he says and every document he shows you. Because men like Marcus can't resist gloating, and gloating requires details. And if he gets suspicious, if he realizes I'm working against him, then I'll be 10 feet away with enough security to make sure he never touches you." Dominic's voice went cold. "This only works if you're comfortable with it, Elena. I meant what I said. You're not a prisoner here, and you're not a tool I'm using. If you want to go a different direction, we go a different direction." Elena read the email again, imagining Marcus's face when he received it. He'd be thrilled, vindicated, probably already planning how to spin her return into evidence of his patience and understanding. The image made her blood boil. "I'll do it," she said. "But I want to add something." "What?" She reached for the keyboard and Dominic slid his chair back to give her access. Elena typed quickly, adding a single line to the end of the email. "I think we need to discuss what really happened with Vanessa. There are things you should know." Dominic read it and laughed, a genuine sound of appreciation. "You're going to make him think your sister confessed something. That's cruel. That's strategic. He'll be so busy worrying about what Vanessa might have told me that he won't think clearly about anything else." Elena hit send before she could second-guess herself. How long before he responds? Knowing Marcus? Less than an hour. He's probably been obsessively checking his phone waiting for you to crack. It took 37 minutes. Elena's phone, the new one Dominic had provided after her old one died in the parking garage, buzzed with an incoming message. Marcus's name appeared on the screen, and Elena felt her hands start to shake before she forced them still. Elena, thank God. I've been so worried about you. Of course we can meet. How about dinner tonight at Corsair? 7 p.m.? We can talk about everything, the wedding, your concerns, whatever you need to feel comfortable moving forward. I know things got complicated, but we can fix this. I miss you. M. Corsair, Dominic said, reading over her shoulder. Expensive, public, neutral territory. He wants you to feel safe, so you'll let your guard down. What do I say? Say yes. Then we spend the next 4 hours making sure you're prepared for every possible direction that conversation could go. Those 4 hours were brutal. Dominic ran her through scenario after scenario, teaching her how to steer conversations toward incriminating topics, how to react if Marcus got aggressive, how to signal if she needed an extraction. Angela appeared with a recording device so small it fit inside a pendant on a necklace, completely invisible unless you knew what to look for. Remember, Dominic said as they ran through the plan for the 5th time, your job isn't to get a confession. It's to be yourself. The Elena that Marcus thinks he knows, the one who's confused and hurt, and may be willing to forgive him if he just explains things the right way. Let him talk. Let him rationalize. Let him paint himself into a corner. And if he asks about us, about where I've been the last 3 days, tell him the truth. You've been staying with a friend, trying to process everything, and you're not ready to go back to your family yet. Don't mention me. Don't mention anything that would make him suspicious. Elena nodded, trying to calm the anxiety churning in her stomach. What if I freeze? What if I can't do this? Dominic reached out and took her hand, the first time he'd touched her since helping her into the car 3 days ago. His grip was warm and steady, grounding her. You walked away from your wedding in front of 500 people, he said quietly. You survived a night in the cold rather than compromise your principles. You spent 3 days learning the truth about your family without falling apart. You're stronger than you think you are, Elena, and you're definitely strong enough to have dinner with a man who doesn't deserve to breathe the same air as you. Something in his voice made Elena look at him more carefully. The calculation was still there, the strategic mind always working 3 moves ahead. But underneath it, she caught a glimpse of something else. Respect, maybe? Or the kind of fierce protectiveness that came from recognizing yourself in someone else's struggle. Why do you care? She asked. Really? Not the business reasons, not the strategic advantages. Why do you actually care what happens to me? Dominic was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes searching her face. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. Because you remind me of what I could have been if I'd made different choices. You're standing at a crossroads I passed a long time ago, and I want to make sure that whichever direction you choose, you're choosing it for the right reasons. Not because someone forced you, not because you had no other options, but because it's genuinely what you want. He released her hand and stood up. Besides, I really hate Marcus Chen, and watching him realize he's lost is going to be the highlight of my month. Despite her nerves, Elena smiled. You're a complicated man, Dominic Vale. I'm a simple man with complicated interests. There's a difference. He checked his watch. It's 5:30. You should get ready. Angela picked out something appropriate. Professional but not aggressive, elegant but not trying too hard. First impressions matter, even with people who already think they know you. The dress Angela had chosen was perfect, a navy sheath that hit just below the knee, paired with simple heels and minimal jewelry except for the necklace with its hidden recording device. Elena looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. 3 days ago, she'd been a bride. Now she was something else entirely. A spy. A saboteur. A woman playing a dangerous game with people who'd already proven they had no problem destroying her. Dominic was waiting when she emerged, flanked by 2 men she hadn't seen before. Both were dressed in dark suits. Both had the kind of calm readiness that suggested military training, or worse. Elena Hart, meet James and Marcus. No relation to your ex-fiancé, which he finds deeply offensive. Dominic gestured to the 2 men. They'll be at Corsair tonight, close enough to help if things go wrong, far enough away that Chen won't notice them. How close is close enough? Elena asked. James, the taller of the 2, smiled slightly. Close enough that if he touches you wrong, we'll know about it before his hand makes contact. Comforting and terrifying, exactly what I needed to hear. The drive to Corsair took 20 minutes through early evening Miami traffic. Elena rode in Dominic's Mercedes, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to stop them from shaking. Dominic sat beside her, radiating calm certainty, occasionally checking his phone or adjusting the small earpiece he wore that would let him hear everything the recording device picked up. "Last chance to back out," he said as they pulled up to the restaurant. "No judgment, no consequences. Just say the word." Elena took a deep breath. "I'm not backing out. I'm ending this. That's my girl." He caught himself. I didn't mean, I know what you meant." Elena opened the car door before the valet could reach it. "Wish me luck." "You don't need luck. You need patience and a good memory. Everything else you already have." Corsair was exactly the kind of restaurant Marcus would choose. Expensive enough to impress, exclusive enough to make reservations meaningful, public enough that Elena would theoretically feel safe. The maitre d' recognized her immediately, his expression flickering between sympathy and curiosity before settling on professional neutrality. "Ms. Hart, Mr. Chen is already here. This way, please." Marcus had chosen a corner table with a view of the water, positioned so he could see the entire restaurant while keeping his back to the wall. Power positioning, Elena realized. Even in an apology dinner, he needed to feel in control. He stood when he saw her, and Elena had to admit he looked good. Marcus Chen had always been handsome in that polished, calculated way. Expensive haircut, perfect suit, smile that had probably been practiced in a mirror until it looked genuine. He'd taken off his jacket, rolled up his sleeves just enough to seem casual, and wore an expression of such profound relief that Elena almost believed it was real. "Elena." He moved to embrace her, but she stepped back and he caught himself. "Right. Of course. I'm sorry. I'm so glad you're okay. I've been worried sick." "Have you?" Elena sat down without waiting for him to pull out her chair. "That's interesting, considering you haven't called me once." Marcus's smile faltered. "I wanted to give you space. After what happened, after your breakdown, I thought you needed time to recover." "My breakdown." Elena picked up the menu, forcing herself to look casual. "Is that what we're calling it? What else would we call it? Elena, you walked out of our wedding. You disappeared for 3 days. Your father's been frantic. Your mother won't stop crying. Everyone's been terrified that something happened to you." He reached across the table, stopping just short of touching her hand. "Where have you been?" "With a friend. Someone who didn't spend the last 2 years lying to me." The barb hit home. Marcus pulled back, his expression shifting into something more guarded. "I never lied to you. You told me you loved me." "I do love you." "You told my sister you were marrying me for my family's shipping contracts and political connections, that I was a means to an end." Elena kept her voice level, conversational, like they were discussing the weather. "So either you lied to me or you lied to her. Which is it?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "You misunderstood what you heard. Vanessa misrepresented—" "I was there, Marcus. I heard every word." Elena set down the menu and met his eyes. "I heard you say marrying me was a business transaction. I heard you laugh about how easy it was to convince me you cared. I heard you planning your life with my sister while I was supposed to be getting ready to marry you." For a moment, something ugly flickered across Marcus's face. Anger, maybe, or frustration at having his narrative challenged. But he smoothed it away quickly, replacing it with wounded sincerity. "Okay, you're right. I said things I shouldn't have said. But Elena, you have to understand the pressure I was under, the expectations from my family, the complexity of merging our businesses. I said what I thought people wanted to hear. It wasn't real." "Which part wasn't real? The part where you called me a means to an end, or the part where you said you'd liquidate me when I stopped being useful?" Marcus flinched. "I was drunk. I was showing off. She was flirting, and I got caught up in it. It didn't mean anything." "It meant something to me. I know. And I'm sorry. I'm genuinely, deeply sorry." He leaned forward, his voice dropping into that intimate register he'd always used when he wanted her to feel special. But think about what we built together. 2 years of partnership, of planning, of creating something meaningful. Are you really going to throw all of that away because of one stupid conversation? One conversation that revealed the truth about our entire relationship. The truth is that I care about you. Maybe I didn't express it perfectly. Maybe I got confused about what I was feeling versus what I was supposed to feel. But I'm here now, asking for another chance. Doesn't that count for something? Elena watched him work, fascinated by the performance. He was good, she'd give him that. Every word carefully chosen, every expression calibrated to maximum emotional impact. If she hadn't spent 3 days with Dominic learning to see through manipulation, she might have actually believed him. What about Vanessa? She asked. Marcus's expression went carefully blank. What about her? She said something interesting to me. About your arrangement. Elena was improvising now, following Dominic's advice to let Marcus paint himself into corners. She seems to think you two had some kind of understanding. Vanessa is delusional. She's always been jealous of you, always wanted what you had. If she told you we had some kind of relationship, she's lying. I didn't say she told me you had a relationship. I said she mentioned an arrangement. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, recalculated. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? Because Vanessa was very specific about the timeline. About when your arrangement with me was supposed to transition into something else. About what happens after the merger is complete. Elena was making this up as she went, watching Marcus's face for confirmation. She seemed to think she was going to be part of your future. Long term. She's wrong. Is she? Because the way she described it, this whole thing was planned. The wedding, the merger, even the affair, all of it designed to give you maximum control over Heart Shipping while keeping everyone distracted by the romance. Marcus's control was slipping. Elena could see it in the tension around his eyes, the way his hands had curled into fists on the table. Vanessa is a lying, manipulative. She doesn't know what she's talking about. Then explain it to me. Make me understand. Elena leaned forward. Because right now it sounds like I walked away from a wedding that was designed to destroy my family's business and put you in control of half of Miami's port operations. It sounds like I was never a bride. I was a signature on a contract. That's not... Marcus stopped himself, visibly trying to regain composure. Elena, you're upset. You're not thinking clearly. Let me take you home. Let's talk to your father together and we can work all of this out like adults. My father? Elena laughed, sharp and bitter. The man who sold me to you for shipping routes? That father? He made a business decision that benefited both families. That's not selling, that's strategic partnership, Elena finished. Asset optimization? What's the corporate euphemism for treating your daughter like merchandise? Marcus stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Several nearby diners glanced over, and he forced himself to sit back down, lowering his voice. You need to stop this. Right now. You're making a scene, you're embarrassing both of us, and you're jeopardizing very important business relationships. I don't care about your business relationships. You should, because everything you have, your apartment, your credit cards, your car, all of it is tied to your father's company. And if you keep pushing this narrative that you were somehow mistreated, if you keep refusing to honor the commitments that were made on your behalf, there will be consequences. There it was, the threat underneath the apology, the iron fist inside the velvet glove. Elena felt the recording device warm against her skin and prayed it was catching every word. What kind of consequences? Marcus's smile turned cold. The kind that happen when people don't understand how the world actually works. Your father has been very patient with your dramatics, but patience has limits. Come back, marry me like you agreed to, and everything goes back to normal. Keep fighting, and you'll discover exactly how quickly normal can disappear. You're threatening me. I'm explaining reality to you. There's a difference. He pulled out his phone and typed something quickly. I've just texted your father. He'll be here in 15 minutes to take you home. I suggest you use that time to think very carefully about what you want your life to look like going forward. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. This was spinning out of control faster than she'd anticipated. And if I leave right now, then you'll be making a very serious mistake. The kind that affects not just you, but everyone associated with you. Friends, employers, anyone who's helped you these last few days. They'll all become very interesting to certain people who ask very pointed questions. He was talking about Dominic without saying his name. Somehow Marcus knew she'd been with someone, and he was threatening them both. Elena stood up slowly, keeping her expression neutral even though fear was clawing at her throat. "I need to use the restroom." "Of course." Marcus's smile was all triumph now. "Take your time. I'll be here when you get back." "We both will be." She walked toward the back of the restaurant, her legs steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. The restroom was down a short hallway, and Elena had just pushed open the door when a hand caught her elbow. She spun, ready to scream, and found herself looking at James, Dominic's security. "Change of plans," he said quietly. "Boss says you're done here. This way." He guided her past the restrooms to a service exit Elena hadn't known existed. The door opened onto an alley where Dominic's Mercedes was already waiting, engine running. Marcus, the security guard, not the ex-fiancé, was at the wheel, and Dominic was in the back seat, his expression darker than she'd ever seen it. "Get in," he said. Elena scrambled into the car, and James slid in beside her. They were moving before the door fully closed, merging into traffic with practiced ease. "What happened?" Elena asked. "Did something go wrong?" Something went very right. Dominic held up his phone, showing her a live audio feed. "We got everything we needed: threats, admissions about the marriage being a business transaction, implications of criminal activity tied to Hart shipping, more than enough to cause serious problems for Marcus Chen." "Then why did you pull me out?" "Because your father just showed up with 6 men, and I'm not interested in seeing how that confrontation would have gone." Dominic's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "You did well, Elena. Better than I expected. But now we move to Phase 2 before they have time to regroup." "Phase 2? Going public." He typed something into his phone. "By morning, every major news outlet in Miami is going to receive an anonymous package containing documentation of Hart Shipping's illegal operations, recordings of Marcus's threats, and enough evidence to trigger federal investigations into both families." "Your father wanted to trade you like property?" "Fine. Let's see how he likes it when his property rights are being questioned by the FBI." Elena leaned back against the seat, her hands finally starting to shake now that the immediate danger had passed. "He threatened you, Marcus. He knew I'd been with someone, and he threatened them." "I know. I heard." Dominic glanced at her, something fierce and protective in his eyes. "That was his second mistake. His first was underestimating you. What's going to happen now?" "Now, we disappear for about 72 hours while law enforcement tears apart everything your family and the Chens have built. We let the system do its job, let the evidence speak for itself, and we stay well clear of the blast radius." He paused. "Unless you want something different, this is still your choice, Elena." She thought about her father, probably still at Corsair waiting for her, confident in his control. She thought about Marcus, his smug smile, his casual threats. She thought about Vanessa, who'd betrayed her own sister for a man who saw both of them as assets to be utilized. And she thought about herself, 3 days ago, sitting in a parking garage in a ruined wedding dress, believing she'd lost everything, not knowing she'd actually been set free. "Burn it down," Elena said clearly. "All of it. I want them to understand what it feels like when the ground disappears beneath your feet." Dominic smiled, sharp and satisfied and entirely without mercy. "Consider it done." The safe house was 40 minutes north of Miami, tucked into a gated community in Palm Beach County where wealthy people paid premium prices for privacy and asked no questions about their neighbors. Dominic's property sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, surrounded by palm trees and high walls, invisible from the street and equipped with security systems that would make most government facilities jealous. Elena stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of the second-floor bedroom, watching the sun set over manicured lawns and trying to process the fact that somewhere in Miami, her entire life was being systematically dismantled by federal agents who'd received anonymous packages full of evidence she'd helped compile. "You should eat something," Angela said from the doorway, carrying a tray with soup and bread. "You haven't had anything since breakfast, and stress doesn't burn calories the way people think it does." "I'm not hungry." "I didn't ask if you were hungry. I said you should eat." Angela set the tray on the dresser with the firmness of someone who'd spent years managing difficult people. "Mr. Vale is on a conference call with his attorneys, but he'll want to debrief you when he's finished. You'll need your strength for that conversation. Elena turned away from the window. How long have you worked for him? 8 years. And in those 8 years, how many women has he brought to safe houses after destroying their families? Angela's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Amusement, maybe, or respect for the directness of the question. You're the first. Mr. Vale doesn't usually get personally involved in his operations. He prefers to maintain strategic distance. Then why did he get involved with me? You'd have to ask him that. Angela moved toward the door, then paused. But if I were guessing, I'd say it's because you reminded him that there are still people in this world worth protecting. People who choose integrity over comfort, even when it costs them everything. She left before Elena could respond, closing the door with a soft click that somehow felt more final than a slam. Elena forced herself to eat the soup, more to give her hands something to do than because she had any appetite. Every few minutes she checked her phone, the secure one Dominic had given her, not the personal device that was probably being tracked by her father's people. No messages, no calls, nothing but the eerie silence of being completely cut off from the world she'd known. She wondered if her mother was worried. Probably. Patricia Hart had always been the kind of woman who cared deeply about appearances and social standing, but underneath the country club polish, there had been genuine affection for her daughters. At least, Elena had always believed there was. Now she wasn't sure what had been real and what had been performance. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Dominic entered without waiting for permission, but somehow it didn't feel invasive. He changed into jeans and a black sweater, looking more relaxed than she'd seen him since this whole thing started, though his eyes were still sharp and alert. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I don't know. Ask me in 72 hours when the dust settles." Elena set down the empty soup bowl. "What's happening out there?" "Exactly what we expected. The FBI received our package at 6 this morning and immediately issued warrants for your father's business records. By noon, they'd frozen Hart Shipping's accounts and started interviewing employees. The Chen family is in full damage control mode, claiming they had no knowledge of any illegal activities and throwing Marcus under the bus so fast he probably has tire marks." "And my father?" Dominic's expression went carefully neutral. "Lawyered up within an hour. He's not talking to anyone, which is smart but also makes him look guilty. Your mother's been calling every person with influence she knows, trying to spin this as some kind of misunderstanding. And Vanessa," he paused, "Vanessa showed up at my office this afternoon demanding to know where you are." Elena's stomach clenched. "What did you tell her?" "Nothing. Angela told her we had no comment on client matters and escorted her out. But she's persistent. She called 17 more times before we had to block her number. She's scared. She knows if this investigation goes deep enough, they'll find out she was involved with Marcus while he was engaged to me. That won't look good for either of them. It's going to look a lot worse when the affair becomes public record in about—" Dominic checked his watch. 3 hours. I may have leaked that particular detail to a few journalists who specialize in society scandals. Elena should have felt satisfaction at that. Instead, she just felt tired. "My family is going to be destroyed." "Your family destroyed themselves. We just documented it." Dominic sat down on the edge of the bed, keeping a respectful distance. "Having second thoughts?" "No. Maybe. I don't know." Elena pressed her palms against her eyes. "They're terrible people who did terrible things, and they deserve to face consequences. I know that intellectually. But emotionally? I keep thinking about Sunday dinners and birthday parties and my mother teaching me how to tie a scarf properly. All these normal family memories that feel fake now, but they didn't feel fake when they were happening. They weren't fake. They were just incomplete." Dominic's voice was surprisingly gentle. "People are complicated, Elena. Your father can be a criminal who loves his daughter. Your mother can be complicit in terrible things and still care about your happiness. Those contradictions don't cancel each other out. They just make them human. Human monsters. Sometimes, yeah." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the same view Elena had been studying earlier. "When I was 17, my father sat me down and told me I had 2 choices. I could go to college, get a normal job, live a normal life, and pretend I didn't come from a family that had been running organized crime operations for 3 generations. Or I could accept my legacy, learn the business, and eventually take over when he retired." Elena waited, sensing there was more. I asked him what he wanted me to choose, and you know what he said? He said he wanted me to choose whatever would let me sleep at night, that he'd built an empire, but empires weren't worth the cost of your soul. Dominic turned back to face her. Then he got arrested 6 months later on racketeering charges and died in prison before his trial even started. Heart attack brought on by stress and a lifetime of violence catching up with him. I'm sorry. Don't be. He made his choices and he knew the price. But before he died, he sent me a letter, 1 sentence, 9 words. Being good at something doesn't make it right. Dominic's smile was bitter. I ignored that advice for a long time. Built my own empire, justified it with the same logic my father used, providing jobs, protecting neighborhoods, giving people opportunities they wouldn't have otherwise. All true. Also all bullshit designed to make me feel better about profiting from other people's weaknesses. Why are you telling me this? Because you're standing where I stood 15 years ago, trying to figure out if loyalty to family overrides loyalty to principles. And I'm telling you from experience that the guilt you feel right now about destroying your family, that's the part of you that's still good. Hold on to it, because the day you stop feeling guilty about hurting people who deserve to be hurt is the day you become exactly like them. The words hit harder than Elena expected. She sat down on the bed, suddenly exhausted. So what do I do with the guilt? You use it as a compass. You make sure that even when you're doing difficult things, you're doing them for the right reasons. You don't become cruel just because you have the power to be cruel. You don't justify collateral damage just because the target deserves punishment. He moved closer, his gray eyes serious. Your family is going to suffer. Some of that suffering is earned. Some of it is just the natural consequence of their choices. But you don't have to enjoy it. You can be both the person who held them accountable and the person who grieves what could have been if they'd made different choices. Elena looked up at him, this complicated man who'd inserted himself into her life and turned it upside down in ways she was still trying to understand. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? A monster, a villain, someone who'd use me to destroy my family and then discard me when I was no longer useful. Well, we've only known each other for 5 days. Give me time. But his smile was softer now, almost vulnerable. For what it's worth, you're not what I expected either. What did you expect? A victim. Someone broken and helpless who needed rescuing. Instead, I got a woman who walked away from her own wedding, spent 3 days learning to weaponize her family's secrets, and looked her ex-fiancé in the eye while recording his threats. He shook his head. You didn't need rescuing, Elena. You just needed resources and a reason to stop apologizing for taking up space. Before Elena could respond, Dominic's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and his expression shifted instantly from philosophical to focused. Turn on the television, he said. Channel 7, now. Elena grabbed the remote and found the local news. The anchor was a polished woman in her 40s, and behind her was a photo of Hart Shipping's headquarters with the words, Breaking News, Federal Investigation, stamped across the bottom. Where federal agents executed search warrants early this morning on Hart Shipping Corporation, one of Miami's oldest and most respected maritime businesses. Sources close to the investigation tell Channel 7 that the warrants are related to allegations of smuggling, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The company's CEO, Richard Hart, has not been charged at this time, but is reportedly cooperating with authorities. The scene cut to shaky cell phone footage of FBI agents carrying boxes out of the Hart Shipping building. Elena recognized the lobby, the logo on the wall, the receptionist's desk where she'd spent summer afternoons as a teenager bringing her father lunch. In a related development, the anchor continued, Marcus Chen, son of prominent businessman David Chen and fiancé to Richard Hart's daughter, Elena, was taken into custody this afternoon on charges of extortion and witness intimidation. The arrest stems from a recorded conversation in which Chen allegedly threatened Ms. Hart and her associates during a dinner meeting at an upscale Miami restaurant. Chen's attorney has issued a statement claiming the recording was obtained illegally and that the charges are politically motivated. A photo of Marcus appeared on screen, his official engagement photo, the one where he looked charming and successful and completely trustworthy. Elena felt her stomach turn. Perhaps most shocking, the anchor went on, and her voice took on that particular tone journalists use when they're about to deliver gossip disguised as news. Sources confirmed that at the time of his arrest, Chen was involved in a romantic relationship with Elena Hart's sister, Vanessa Hart. The affair allegedly began months before the planned wedding and continued up until the ceremony was canceled under mysterious circumstances last Saturday night. The screen showed a photo of Vanessa and Marcus leaving a hotel together, clearly taken by someone with a telephoto lens. The timestamp indicated it was from 2 weeks ago. Jesus, Elena whispered. That photo was taken by a private investigator I hired 3 months ago, Dominic said quietly. I've been watching Marcus Chen for a while, documenting his movements. I just didn't know you were going to become relevant to the situation. You've been planning this for 3 months? I've been planning something for 3 months. What exactly that something was kept evolving? He sat down beside her on the bed. Marcus Chen has been a problem for me since he tried to muscle into my shipping routes last year. I needed leverage against him, so I started collecting evidence of his various indiscretions. The affair with your sister was just one piece of a larger pattern. So you were already investigating him when you found me in the parking garage? Yes. And you saw an opportunity to use me. Dominic was quiet for a moment. Yes, initially, but that's not why I stayed involved. Why did you stay involved? He looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something in his expression that wasn't calculated or strategic, just honest and raw, and maybe a little scared. Because when I saw you sitting there in that destroyed wedding dress, refusing to go back even though you had nowhere else to go, I remembered what it felt like to choose the hard right over the easy wrong. And I wanted to be the kind of person who helped someone make that choice instead of the kind who exploited it. He stood up abruptly, putting distance between them. But make no mistake, Elena, I'm still using you. Your insider knowledge, your willingness to testify if it comes to that, your very existence as Marcus's abandoned fiancée, all of it serves my purposes. I'm just trying to make sure you get something out of it too. What do I get out of it? Freedom, the real kind, not the illusion your family was selling. When this is over, you'll have enough money to start fresh anywhere you want. You'll have documentation proving you had no knowledge of your family's crimes. You'll have your life back, on your terms, with no one controlling your choices. He met her eyes. And you'll have whatever favor I eventually ask for, which I promise will be something you can live with. Elena wanted to argue, to call him out on the manipulation even as he was admitting to it. But she couldn't, because everything he said was true. She was being used, and she was using him right back. It was transactional and strategic and completely devoid of the romantic fantasies she'd built her life around with Marcus, and somehow it felt more honest than anything she'd experienced in years. Okay, she said finally. I can live with that. Dominic nodded, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. Good, because things are about to get significantly more complicated. More complicated than federal investigations and public scandals? Much more. Thus, he pulled up something on his phone and showed it to her. Your father just issued a statement through his attorney. Elena read the statement, her blood going cold with each word. Richard Hart was claiming that his daughter had suffered a mental breakdown due to the stress of wedding planning, that she'd fallen under the influence of unsavory individuals with grudges against the Hart and Chen families, that the evidence against Hart shipping was fabricated by these same individuals to discredit legitimate businesses, and that he was committed to clearing his name while ensuring his daughter received the psychiatric care she desperately needs. He's trying to have me committed, Elena said, her voice hollow. He's trying to discredit you so that anything you say or any testimony you give can be dismissed as the ravings of an unstable woman. Dominic took the phone back. It's actually a smart play. If he can establish a pattern of mental illness, suddenly all that evidence we compiled becomes questionable. Did you really overhear those conversations, or were you having paranoid delusions? Did Marcus really threaten you, or did you misinterpret a normal conversation through the lens of your breakdown? That's insane. I'm not mentally ill. You don't have to be mentally ill for the accusation to work. You just have to appear unstable enough that reasonable people have doubts. He started pacing, his mind clearly working through scenarios. Your father will find doctors willing to testify that you showed signs of instability. Your mother will tearfully confirm that you've been struggling with stress. Vanessa will probably claim you were always jealous of her, that you fabricated the affair because you couldn't handle the competition. So what do? We get ahead of it. Tomorrow morning, you're going to give an interview to a journalist I trust. You're going to tell your story, all of it. The arranged marriage, the affair, the threats, everything. You're going to be calm, articulate, and completely credible. And you're going to make it very clear that you're not a victim having a breakdown. You're a woman who discovered the truth and had the courage to act on it. Elena felt panic rising in her chest. I can't do a television interview. I'll fall apart. You won't. You'll be brilliant. Dominic stopped pacing and crouched in front of her, taking her hands. Listen to me. You've already done the hard part. You walked away. You gathered evidence. You faced Marcus and didn't break. An interview is nothing compared to what you've already survived. What if I say the wrong thing? What if I make it worse? Then we deal with it. But Elena, the alternative is letting your father control the narrative. Is that what you want? To have your choices, your truth, your entire life defined by a man who sold you to secure a business deal? The answer was obvious, but saying it out loud still required more courage than Elena thought she had. She took a deep breath and met Dominic's eyes. No, that's not what I want. Then tomorrow, we fight back, together. The word together hung in the air between them, weighted with implications neither of them was ready to examine. Dominic released her hands and stood up, the moment of vulnerability passing as quickly as it had appeared. Get some rest, he said, his voice returning to its normal, controlled cadence. Angela will help you prepare in the morning. We'll do a few practice runs before the actual interview, so you know what to expect. He was almost to the door when Elena called out, Dominic? He turned back. Thank you for all of this. Even the parts that are manipulation and strategy and using me for your own purposes. Thank you for at least being honest about it. Something crossed his face. Surprise, maybe, or gratitude for being seen clearly. You're welcome. And Elena? For what it's worth, the using you for my own purposes part has gotten significantly more complicated since we started. These days, I'm not entirely sure what my purposes are anymore. He left before she could ask what he meant, closing the door softly behind him. Elena sat in the quiet room, listening to the distant sound of Angela moving around downstairs, the faint hum of security systems monitoring the perimeter, the whisper of her own breathing in the darkness. Tomorrow, she'd face cameras and journalists and the entire weight of public opinion. Tomorrow, she'd tell her story to strangers and hope they believed her instead of her father's carefully constructed lies. But tonight, she was just a woman in a safe house, protected by a crime boss who'd shown her more honesty than her own family, preparing to wage war against the people who were supposed to love her unconditionally. She thought about calling her mother, almost picked up the phone a dozen times. But what would she say? I'm sorry I'm destroying the family, but you should have raised me to accept being traded like property. There were no words for this kind of betrayal, no script for the conversation where you told your parents you were choosing truth over loyalty. Instead, Elena turned off the lights and lay down on the bed, still fully dressed, staring at the ceiling and wondering when the guilt would stop feeling like it was crushing her chest. Somewhere in Miami, her father was plotting. Marcus was sitting in a cell. Vanessa was probably crying to anyone who'd listen about how she'd been manipulated and used. The whole machinery of their world was turning, adjusting to the new reality Elena had created. And here, in this borrowed room in this safe house, Elena Hart was learning that freedom had a price, and she was only beginning to understand what she'd agreed to pay. The interview was scheduled for 10 in the morning at a neutral location, a production studio in Fort Lauderdale that specialized in documentaries and investigative journalism. Elena woke at 6, her stomach already churning with anxiety, and found Angela waiting outside her door with coffee and a garment bag. Navy suit, Angela said, handing over the bag. Professional, trustworthy, not trying too hard. Hair pulled back but not severe. Minimal makeup. We want you to look polished but accessible. The camera adds artificiality, so we're compensating by keeping everything as natural as possible. Elena took the coffee gratefully. Have you done this before? Prepped people for interviews? I spent 5 years in crisis management for a PR firm before Mr. Vale hired me. Trust me when I say I've seen every possible way a media appearance can go wrong. Angela's expression softened slightly. You're going to do fine. You're smart, articulate, And most importantly, you're telling the truth. That matters more than people think. What if the truth isn't enough? Then we adapt. But Elena, your father is counting on you falling apart, on you seeming unstable or vindictive or unreliable. The absolute best thing you can do is prove him wrong by being none of those things. 2 hours later, Elena sat in a makeup chair while a woman named Rosa worked on her face with professional efficiency. Dominic stood nearby, reviewing notes on his tablet, occasionally offering suggestions about messaging and tone. "Remember," he said, "the journalist is Rebecca Moreno. She's good at her job, which means she'll push for emotional responses, but won't ambush you. She knows the broad strokes of the story, but not all the details. Let her guide the conversation, but don't be afraid to redirect if she goes somewhere you're not comfortable. What if she asks about you? About where I've been staying? Tell her you've been staying with friends who've provided security and legal support. You don't have to name names. If she pushes, just say you're concerned for their safety given the threats Marcus made." Dominic looked up from his tablet. "The goal isn't to hide our association. It's to frame it correctly. You're not some crime boss's puppet. You're a woman who found allies when her family abandoned her." Elena studied him in the mirror, this man who'd become so central to her life in less than a week. He looked tired, she realized. There were shadows under his eyes that suggested he hadn't slept well, and his normal, unshakable composure had small cracks showing through. "Did you sleep at all last night?" she asked. "A few hours. I had calls with attorneys, conversations with people who needed convincing that helping you was worth their while. The usual crisis management." He set down the tablet. "Your father's team has been busy too. They've already contacted 3 networks trying to get them to kill any stories about the investigation, claiming it's all a misunderstanding that will be cleared up shortly. Will it work? Not after your interview airs, but it means we're running out of time to control the narrative." He checked his watch. "Rebecca's here. Are you ready?" Elena looked at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back looked calm and professional, nothing like the bride who'd sat in a parking garage 6 days ago. But underneath the polished exterior, her heart was hammering against her ribs. "No," she said honestly. "But I'm doing it anyway." The studio was smaller than Elena expected, just a simple set with 2 chairs positioned at an angle, soft lighting designed to be flattering but not artificial, cameras mounted on silent rigs that would capture every micro-expression. Rebecca Moreno was already seated, reviewing her notes. A woman in her early 50s with sharp eyes and an air of competence that was somehow both intimidating and reassuring. She stood when Elena entered, offering her hand. "Ms. Hart, thank you for agreeing to speak with me. I know this must be incredibly difficult. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to tell my side of the story. That's exactly what this is, your story, in your words. I'm just here to ask questions and let you speak." Rebecca gestured to the empty chair. "Shall we begin?" Elena sat down, hyper-aware of the cameras, the boom microphone hovering just out of frame, Dominic and Angela watching from behind the monitors. A production assistant clipped a wireless microphone to her lapel, tested the levels, then retreated. "We'll start with some basic background questions to help you relax," Rebecca said, her voice kind. "Then we'll move into the more difficult material. If you need a break at any point, just say so. This isn't live television. We can stop and start as needed." Elena nodded, not trusting her voice yet. A red light appeared on the main camera. They were recording. Rebecca's entire demeanor shifted slightly, becoming more formal without losing its warmth. "Elena Hart, thank you for speaking with me today. Let's start at the beginning. You were engaged to Marcus Chen for 2 years. Can you tell me about that relationship?" Elena took a breath and let the truth flow. "I thought I was in love. Marcus was charming, successful, attentive, in all the ways that matter when you're young and looking for validation. He said the right things, introduced me to the right people, made me feel special. I didn't know until much later that I wasn't his girlfriend. I was his access point to my family's business." "When did you start to suspect something was wrong?" "There were small things that didn't add up. Conversations that ended abruptly when I entered a room. Marcus taking calls from my father at odd hours and being vague about what they discussed. My father pushing for the wedding to happen quickly, which I thought was just him being traditional, but now I understand was about securing the business merger before anyone could look too closely at the details." Rebecca leaned forward slightly. A business merger. Can you elaborate on that? My family owns Hart Shipping, which handles a significant percentage of cargo moving through Miami's port. Marcus's family has been trying to expand their operations, legitimate and otherwise, for years, but they needed access to shipping infrastructure they didn't control. Marrying me gave Marcus that access. You're saying the engagement was a business transaction disguised as a romance? I'm saying I was a transaction. The romance was just the wrapping paper. Elena kept her voice steady, factual. I discovered this the night of my wedding when I found Marcus with my sister. I overheard them talking about our marriage like it was a corporate acquisition, about how I was a means to an end, about what would happen after the contract was fulfilled. Your sister. Rebecca's voice was gentle but probing. Vanessa Hart. She was involved with your fiancé while you were planning your wedding? She was. I don't know how long it had been going on, but based on what I heard, it wasn't new. And it wasn't just an affair, it was part of the plan. Keep me distracted and focused on wedding preparations while they finalized the business arrangements. That must have been devastating. For the first time, Elena's composure cracked slightly. It was, but not for the reasons you might think. I wasn't heartbroken over losing Marcus. I was heartbroken over realizing I'd never had him to begin with. That everything I thought was real was just a performance designed to manipulate me into signing away my future. So you walked away from the wedding? I did. In front of 500 guests, with my father threatening me, my mother begging me to reconsider, everyone telling me I was making a mistake and embarrassing the family. But I walked away because I finally understood that being alone was better than being with people who saw me as property. Rebecca consulted her notes. What happened after you left the wedding? Elena hesitated, aware that her answer would establish the framework for everything else. I spent several hours on my own trying to process what I'd learned. Then someone found me and offered help, security, legal resources, a safe place to stay while I figured out what to do next. This person who helped you, were they connected to Marcus Chen or your father? No. They were someone who had their own reasons for wanting to expose the criminal activities both families were involved in. They saw an opportunity in my situation, and I saw an opportunity in their resources. It was mutually beneficial. Criminal activities. Rebecca's eyes sharpened. That's a serious allegation. Can you be more specific? This was the moment. Elena could feel Dominic's attention from across the room, could sense Angela holding her breath. Everything hinged on how she delivered this next part. My father has been using Hart Shipping to smuggle contraband for years. Drugs, weapons, black market pharmaceuticals, anything that pays well and can be hidden in legitimate cargo. The Chen family wanted access to those routes so they could expand their own operations. The marriage was supposed to legitimize their connection to Hart Shipping and give them legal cover for taking over the smuggling network. That's an extraordinary claim. Do you have evidence? I do. Documentation, recordings, shipping manifests that show one thing on paper and another thing in reality. I've turned all of it over to federal authorities, and I understand they're currently investigating both families. Rebecca was quiet for a moment, letting that sink in. Your father has issued a statement claiming you're suffering from a mental breakdown, that the stress of the wedding caused you to have paranoid delusions. How do you respond to that? Elena had practiced this answer with Dominic and Angela for an hour this morning, running through every possible variation until it sounded natural instead of rehearsed. It's a predictable tactic. When someone tells an inconvenient truth, the easiest way to discredit them is to question their mental state. But I'm not having delusions. I'm not unstable. I'm a woman who discovered that the people she trusted most in the world were using her as a pawn in a criminal enterprise, and I made the difficult choice to hold them accountable. She looked directly at the camera. If wanting justice for being lied to and manipulated makes me mentally ill, then I'm guilty as charged, but I don't think it does. You mentioned recordings. Can you tell me about the conversation with Marcus Chen that led to his arrest? He asked to meet me for dinner, supposedly to reconcile. I agreed because I wanted to hear him try to explain what I'd discovered. During that conversation, he admitted that our engagement was primarily a business arrangement. He threatened me when I indicated I wouldn't go through with the marriage. He said there would be consequences for me and anyone who'd helped me if I didn't cooperate. What kind of consequences? The implied kind. He mentioned that people who opposed his family's interests often found themselves facing legal problems, business difficulties, or worse. He said my father's patience had limits and that I should think carefully about what I wanted my life to look like going forward. Elena's voice hardened. It wasn't subtle. It was a direct threat designed to scare me into compliance. Were you scared? Terrified. But being scared doesn't mean you stop doing the right thing. It just means you have to be braver to do it. Rebecca smiled slightly, the first break in her professional demeanor. You've been remarkably composed through all of this. How are you really doing, Elena? The question caught her off guard. Elena had been prepared for skepticism, for challenges to her credibility, for attempts to trip her up on details. She hadn't been prepared for genuine concern. I'm angry, she said, and suddenly the words were pouring out unfiltered. I'm angry at my father for valuing business over his daughter. I'm angry at Marcus for thinking he could use me and discard me like I was nothing. I'm angry at myself for not seeing it sooner, for all the red flags I ignored because I wanted so badly to believe someone loved me. And I'm angry that telling the truth means destroying my family, even though they deserve it. Do they deserve it? Yes, and that makes me angry too, because I wish they didn't. I wish my father was the man I thought he was. I wish my mother had protected me instead of protecting the family reputation. I wish Vanessa hadn't betrayed me for a man who was using her just as much as he was using me. Elena's eyes were burning, but she refused to cry on camera. I wish a lot of things, but wishes don't change reality, and the reality is that my family chose crime over integrity, and I'm choosing not to be complicit in that anymore. Rebecca was quiet, letting the emotion of that statement resonate. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. What happens now? After this interview airs, after the investigations conclude, where do you go from here? I don't know. For the first time in my life, I genuinely don't know what comes next, and that's terrifying and liberating in equal measure. Elena managed a small smile. But whatever it is, it'll be my choice. Not my father's, not Marcus's, not anyone else's. Just mine. One final question. If you could say something to young women who might be in similar situations, relationships that feel wrong, families that prioritize appearance over truth, pressure to conform to expectations that conflict with their values, what would you tell them? Elena thought about the girl she'd been a week ago, standing at an altar in a $23,000 dress, seconds away from making the biggest mistake of her life. She thought about all the small compromises, all the ignored instincts, all the times she'd talked herself out of what she knew in her gut was true. I tell them that the voice in your head that says something is wrong is usually right, even when everyone around you is insisting it's fine. I tell them that walking away is hard, but living a lie is harder. And I tell them that you're allowed to choose yourself, even when it disappoints people, even when it causes problems, even when it means starting over from nothing. She paused. Because nothing that's truly yours is better than everything that belongs to someone else. Rebecca nodded slowly. Thank you, Elena. That's incredibly powerful. The red light on the camera went dark. The interview was over. Elena sat very still as the production assistant removed her microphone, her mind struggling to process what she'd just done. She'd told the truth to cameras that would broadcast it to thousands of people. She'd publicly accused her father of crimes. She'd admitted to being manipulated and used. She'd laid her pain and anger and grief out for strangers to judge. And somehow she felt lighter than she had in years. Dominic appeared at her side, offering his hand to help her stand. You were perfect, he said quietly. Exactly what we needed. I wasn't performing. Everything I said was real. I know, that's why it was perfect. He guided her away from the set toward a small private room where Angela was waiting with water and tissues. The interview will air tonight at 8. By 9, every news outlet in the country will be running clips. By morning, your father's narrative about your mental state will be completely discredited. And then what? Then we wait for the fallout and prepare for whatever comes next. What came next arrived faster than any of them anticipated. They were back at the safe house by early afternoon, Elena exhausted from the emotional weight of the interview, Dominic fielding calls from attorneys and contacts, Angela coordinating with Rebecca's team about the evening broadcast. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Then Dominic's phone rang with a number he didn't recognize, and his entire expression changed. When? He said sharply into the phone. How many? A pause. Understood. We're on our way. He hung up and looked at Elena with an intensity that made her stomach drop. What happened? Your mother just showed up at my office in Miami. She's asking to speak with you, and she brought your father's attorney and what appears to be commitment papers to have you involuntarily hospitalized for psychiatric evaluation. Elena felt the room tilt. They're trying to have me committed? They're trying. Angela's team is stalling them, but we need to get ahead of this before they find a judge willing to sign off on an emergency psychiatric hold. Dominic was already moving, grabbing his jacket and keys. We're going back to Miami, now. That's insane. I'm not mentally ill. The interview proves I'm completely rational. The interview hasn't aired yet. Right now, all they have is your father's statement and whatever story they've convinced your mother to tell. If they can get you committed before the broadcast, they can claim the interview was conducted while you were in a delusional state, which undermines everything you said. Elena grabbed her bag, her hands shaking with a combination of fear and fury. My mother wouldn't do this. She wouldn't actually try to have me locked up in a psychiatric facility. Dominic's expression was grim. Your mother is at my office right now with legal documents designed to do exactly that. Whatever relationship you think you have with her, you need to understand that when it comes down to protecting you or protecting the family, she's already made her choice. The drive back to Miami took 35 minutes through midday traffic that seemed designed to maximize Elena's anxiety. She sat in the back of the Mercedes, watching the city approach through the window, trying to prepare herself for a confrontation with her mother that she'd never imagined having to have. Dominic's office building appeared ahead, its glass facade reflecting the afternoon sun. A small crowd had gathered outside. News vans, cameras, reporters who'd somehow gotten wind that something newsworthy was happening. Elena's stomach clenched. They know I'm here, she said. Good. Let them see you. Let them see that you're calm, rational, and definitely not someone who needs psychiatric intervention. Dominic's jaw was set. Your mother wanted a public confrontation? She's about to get one. The car pulled up to the building's private entrance, but before they could exit, Elena's phone rang. Her mother's number appeared on the screen. Don't answer, Dominic said immediately. But Elena was already accepting the call, some part of her desperately hoping this was all a misunderstanding, that her mother was calling to say she'd been forced into this and wanted to help Elena instead. Mom? Patricia Hart's voice came through the speaker, tight with stress and something that might have been genuine anguish. Elena, sweetheart, please, just come talk to me. Let me help you. You're not thinking clearly, and I understand. The stress, the embarrassment, everything that happened. It's overwhelming. But we can fix this. There are excellent facilities where you can rest, get proper treatment, and then we can work everything out as a family. I don't need treatment. I'm not sick. You walked away from your wedding, Elena. You've been hiding with criminals who are filling your head with lies about your father. You're making accusations that could destroy our entire family based on paranoid delusions. These are not the actions of a healthy person. Elena felt something break inside her chest. Not her composure, but the last fragile hope that her mother might choose her over family loyalty. They're not delusions, Mom. Everything I've said is true, and you know it. You've always known what Dad was doing with the shipping company. You chose to look the other way because it was convenient, because it funded the lifestyle you wanted, because asking questions would have been uncomfortable. That's not fair. I've always protected you, always put you first. You're literally trying to have me committed to a psychiatric hospital right now. You brought Dad's lawyer to Dominic's office with legal papers to lock me away, so I can't tell the truth about what our family has been doing. How is that putting me first? Silence on the other end of the line. When Patricia spoke again, her voice was different, harder, more desperate. If you don't stop this, Elena, you're going to destroy everything. Your father will go to prison. Our assets will be seized. Everything we've built, everything we are, will be gone. Is that really what you want? To be responsible for ruining your entire family? I want you to take responsibility for your own choices instead of blaming me for exposing them. Please. Now Patricia was crying, and Elena hated how much that sound still affected her. Please, just come inside. Talk to me face to face. Let me explain things you don't understand. You're my daughter, and I love you, and I can't watch you throw your life away because you're angry and confused. Dominic was shaking his head, mouthing, "Don't do it." But Elena was already making up her mind. I'll come inside, she said, but I'm bringing witnesses and I'm not signing anything. This isn't a negotiation, Mom. It's me giving you one chance to do the right thing. She hung up before her mother could respond. Dominic looked at her like she'd lost her mind. That's exactly what they want. They get you inside, claim you're having an episode, and suddenly those commitment papers look a lot more legitimate. Then make sure that doesn't happen. Bring cameras, bring witnesses, bring whoever you need to bring, but I'm not hiding from my mother. Elena met his eyes. You said this was my choice, remember? Well, I'm choosing to face her. I'm choosing to look her in the eye and make her admit what she's really doing. For a long moment, Dominic just stared at her. Then he pulled out his phone and started making calls. Fine, we do this your way, but the second things go sideways, we're out of there, understood? Understood. 10 minutes later, they walked into Dominic's office building, surrounded by an entourage that looked like a small army. Dominic's security team flanked them. 2 attorneys Dominic had summoned walked ahead, clearing a path, and bringing up the rear was a cameraman Dominic had called from Rebecca Moreno's team to document everything that happened. Patricia Hart was waiting in Dominic's main conference room, looking every inch the society matriarch. Designer suit, perfect hair, pearls that had probably been her grandmother's. Standing beside her was Gerald Morrison, Richard Hart's attorney for the past 20 years, holding a leather folder that Elena knew contained the commitment papers. Her mother's face crumpled when she saw Elena, genuine emotion breaking through the careful composure. Oh, sweetheart, look at you. You look exhausted. I am exhausted, Mom. Exhausted from discovering my entire life was a lie. Exhausted from being treated like a commodity instead of a person. Exhausted from having to fight my own family just to be allowed to tell the truth. Patricia reached out as if to embrace her, but Elena stepped back. The rejection clearly hurt, which gave Elena a small, bitter satisfaction. Let's all sit down, Gerald Morrison said with practiced calm. I'm sure we can resolve this situation reasonably if everyone remains civil. Civil, Elena repeated. Like civilly trying to have me declared mentally incompetent so I can be locked in a psychiatric facility? It's not like that, Patricia started. Then what is it like? Explain to me how showing up with commitment papers is anything other than trying to silence me before I can tell the truth about Dad's criminal operation. Gerald's expression remained neutral. Your father is concerned about your welfare, Elena. The allegations you've been making, the company you've been keeping. His eyes flicked to Dominic with obvious disdain. These are signs of a psychological break that requires professional intervention. I'm not having a psychological break. I'm perfectly sane, and you know it. Do you deny that you walked away from your wedding in front of hundreds of witnesses? No. I deny that walking away from a fraudulent marriage makes me mentally ill. Do you deny that you've been staying with a known criminal who has a vested interest in destroying your family's business? I've been staying with someone who offered me protection when my own family threatened me. That's not insane. That's survival. Gerald opened his folder and pulled out several documents. We have statements from multiple witnesses indicating erratic behavior, emotional instability, and paranoid accusations without factual basis. We have your own father testifying that you've always been prone to dramatic reactions and poor judgment. And we have documented evidence that you've aligned yourself with individuals who are actively working to harm your family. What you have, Dominic said, speaking for the first time since they'd entered the room, is a desperate attempt to discredit a woman who's about to expose a decade of criminal activity. And it's not going to work. Gerald's smile was thin. Mr. Vale, I wondered when you'd involve yourself directly. Tell me, does Elena know about your own legal troubles? The federal investigations into your operations? The fact that everything you touch turns criminal? Actually, she does. I've been remarkably honest with her about who I am and what I do. Can you say the same about her father? Patricia stood abruptly. This is getting us nowhere. Elena, please, just sign the papers allowing us to get you proper care. A few weeks of rest, some therapy to process the trauma of the wedding, that's all we're asking. Then you can come home and we'll work everything out as a family. Elena looked at her mother, really looked at her, and saw the cracks in the facade, the fear in her eyes, the desperation in her voice, the way her hands trembled slightly even as she tried to project authority. Patricia Hart wasn't a monster. She was just a woman who'd spent her entire life prioritizing comfort over conscience, and now she was watching that choice destroy her daughter. I'm not signing anything, Elena said quietly. And I'm not coming home. Home is where people love you more than they love their secrets, and that's not what our house has been for a very long time. Elena, please, I did an interview this morning with Rebecca Moreno. It airs tonight at 8. In that interview, I explain everything. The arranged marriage, the smuggling operation, the threats, all of it. By 9 o'clock, everyone in Miami will know the truth about our family. Your commitment papers won't change that. They'll just make you look even more desperate and guilty. Patricia's face went white. You didn't. I did. And Mom? I meant every word I said. Dad is a criminal. You enabled him. Marcus used me. Vanessa betrayed me. And I'm done pretending any of that is acceptable just because we're family. The door to the conference room burst open, and Richard Hart himself strode in, his face purple with rage, 3 large men in suits flanking him like personal bodyguards. Enough, he roared. Elena, you're coming with me right now, and you're going to fix this disaster you've created. Sleep didn't come that night, and Elena was grateful for it. She needed the hours of darkness to prepare herself for what morning would bring, to rehearse the words that would either save her or destroy what little remained of her credibility. Angela had left talking points on the nightstand, key phrases, emotional beats, strategic pivots, but Elena pushed them aside. If she was going to do this, it would be in her own words, with her own truth, regardless of how messy or imperfect that truth might be. Dawn broke over Palm Beach County in shades of pink and gold that seemed absurdly beautiful given the circumstances. Elena showered and dressed in the outfit Angela had selected, a simple white blouse and navy pants that projected competence without arrogance, vulnerability without weakness. She barely recognized the woman staring back at her from the mirror. A week ago, she'd been a bride. Now she was a witness, a whistleblower, a woman about to tell the world that her family's empire was built on lies and violence. Dominic was already awake when she came downstairs, sitting at the kitchen island with 3 laptops open and his phone pressed to his ear. He held up one finger, finishing his conversation in rapid Spanish that Elena's high school education couldn't quite follow. When he hung up, he studied her with those sharp gray eyes that seemed to see everything. You ready for this? He asked. No, but I'm doing it anyway. That's the only kind of ready that matters. He poured her coffee from a French press, the gesture surprisingly domestic from a man who probably had people killed before breakfast. The interview is at 9. Jennifer Martinez is the journalist. She's tough but fair, and she hates corruption more than she likes sensational stories. She'll push you on the hard questions, but she won't try to trap you. What if my father shows up? What if he tries to stop this? He can't. The interview location is undisclosed, and we've got security that would make the Secret Service jealous. Your father doesn't even know you're in Palm Beach County. Dominic slid a folder across the counter. But you should know what he's been saying about you. Elena opened the folder and immediately wished she hadn't. Her father's latest statement was even more damning than the first, claiming she'd been exhibiting erratic behavior for months, that the family had been trying to get her help, that her accusations were the product of paranoid delusions exacerbated by the stress of wedding planning. He'd even found a psychiatrist willing to speculate on television about possible diagnoses, throwing around words like borderline personality disorder and psychotic break. He's destroying me, Elena whispered. He's trying to. There's a difference. Dominic closed the folder. But here's what he doesn't know. Last night, 3 of Hart Shipping's former employees came forward with their own stories about being pressured to falsify shipping manifests. 2 of them have documentation. One of them recorded conversations with your father where he explicitly discussed moving illegal cargo. Your father's narrative only works if you're the only person making accusations. Now you're not. Why would they come forward now? Because people talk, and word got out that there was an investigation, because some of them have been carrying guilt about what they were part of, and because, he paused, something almost sheepish crossing his face. I may have offered them witness protection and relocation assistance if they were willing to testify. You're buying witnesses. I'm protecting people who were coerced into criminal activity by a man with more power than conscience. There's a difference. He stood up, closing the laptops. Your father thought he could isolate you, make you look crazy, turn this into a case of one unstable woman versus an entire business empire. Instead, he's facing a chorus of voices all saying the same thing. He's done, Elena. He just doesn't know it yet. The interview took place in a nondescript office building in West Palm Beach, in a room that had been converted into a makeshift studio with lights and cameras and sound equipment. Jennifer Martinez was waiting when they arrived, a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and the kind of direct gaze that suggested she'd heard every lie in existence and wouldn't tolerate another one. "Ms. Hart," she said, offering her hand, "thank you for agreeing to speak with me. I know this can't be easy." Nothing about this week has been easy," Elena replied, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "But it's necessary." They sat down in chairs positioned to face each other, close enough for intimacy, but far enough for professional distance. A makeup artist touched up Elena's face, and a sound technician clipped a microphone to her collar. Dominic stood in the corner of the room, his presence both comforting and slightly terrifying. A reminder that she wasn't alone, but also that this interview was part of a larger strategy she didn't fully control. "We're going to start with some basic questions to get you comfortable," Jennifer said, her voice kind but professional. "Then we'll move into the harder material. If you need a break at any point, just say so. This is your story, and we're going to tell it on your terms." The cameras started rolling, and Jennifer's entire demeanor shifted from sympathetic to journalistic. "Elena Hart, a week ago you were supposed to marry Marcus Chen, heir to one of Miami's most prominent business families, in what was being called the social event of the season. Instead, you walked out of your own wedding and disappeared. Can you tell me what happened?" Elena took a breath and began to speak. The words came easier than she'd expected, flowing out of some deep well of truth she'd been holding back for too long. She told Jennifer about finding Marcus and Vanessa together, about overhearing their conversation, about realizing that her entire engagement had been a business transaction disguised as romance. She explained how her father's shipping company had been central to the arrangement, how Marcus had wanted access to Hart Shipping's operations for purposes that had nothing to do with legitimate business. "When you say nothing to do with legitimate business, what do you mean specifically?" Jennifer asked. "I mean smuggling, money laundering, using my family's company to move illegal cargo through the port of Miami." Elena met the camera's gaze directly. "I didn't know about it before the wedding. I was kept in the dark, treated like a signature on a contract rather than a person with agency. But once I started asking questions, once I started looking at the evidence, it became impossible to ignore." "And your father's response to these questions?" "He tried to have me declared mentally incompetent so that anything I said could be dismissed as the product of a breakdown." Elena's voice hardened. "He chose protecting his criminal enterprise over protecting his daughter. That tells you everything you need to know about what matters to Richard Hart." Jennifer leaned forward. "There are people who will watch this interview and think you're a scorned woman looking for revenge against your ex-fiancé and your family. How do you respond to that?" "I'd say they should look at the evidence. 3 federal agencies are currently investigating Hart Shipping based on documentation I helped provide. Marcus Chen is in custody on extortion charges based on recordings of him threatening me directly. Multiple former employees have come forward with their own accounts of being pressured to participate in illegal activities." Elena paused, choosing her next words carefully. "This isn't about revenge, this is about accountability. And if being a scorned woman is what it takes to hold powerful men responsible for their crimes, then I'll wear that label proudly." The interview continued for another hour, Jennifer pressing on details and timelines and emotional impacts. Elena answered every question as honestly as she could, even the ones that made her look naive or complicit. Yes, she'd been blind to what was happening around her. Yes, she'd trusted people who didn't deserve that trust. Yes, part of her still loved her family, despite everything they'd done. "What do you want people to understand about your situation?" Jennifer asked near the end. Elena thought about the question, about all the things she'd learned in the past week about power and choice and the price of freedom. "I want people to understand that abuse isn't always obvious. It doesn't always leave bruises you can see. Sometimes it looks like a beautiful wedding dress and a promising future. Sometimes it looks like family dinners and business opportunities. Sometimes the people hurting you are the same people who claim to love you most." She felt tears building, but didn't try to stop them. "And I want other women who might be in similar situations to know that walking away is possible. It's terrifying and it costs more than you think you can afford to pay, but it's possible. You don't have to accept the life other people have planned for you. You can choose something different, even if that choice means standing alone. When the cameras finally stopped rolling, Elena felt hollowed out, like she'd given away pieces of herself that she'd never get back. Jennifer thanked her, promised the interview would air that evening, and quietly added that she believed her. "For what it's worth," Jennifer said, "I've been covering Miami corruption for 20 years, and this is the bravest thing I've seen anyone do. Your father has powerful friends, and they're going to come after you hard. But you just made it a lot harder for them to succeed." Dominic drove them back to the safe house in silence, giving Elena space to process what she'd just done. It wasn't until they were back behind the security walls that he finally spoke. "You were extraordinary," he said quietly. "Better than I could have hoped. I feel like I just set fire to my entire life." "You did, but sometimes that's the only way to clear ground for something new to grow." He pulled the car into the garage and turned off the engine but made no move to get out. "Your father is going to retaliate, probably within hours of this interview airing. I need you to be prepared for that." "What kind of retaliation?" "The kind where he shows up here with lawyers and possibly law enforcement, claiming you've been kidnapped or coerced. The kind where he tries to paint me as the villain and himself as the concerned father trying to rescue his troubled daughter." Dominic's jaw tightened. "I've dealt with men like your father before. When they can't control the narrative, they try to control the people telling it. So what do? We let him come. We let him make his accusations, and then we show him exactly how little power he actually has." Dominic finally looked at her, his gray eyes intense. "But Elena, I need you to understand something. Once your father shows up here, once he sees us together, he's going to assume the worst about our relationship. He's going to tell everyone who will listen that I manipulated you, seduced you, turned you against your family, and there's nothing we can do to stop that narrative except live through it." Will people believe him? Some will. The ones who want to believe that women can't make their own decisions, that we're all just pawns being moved around by more powerful players. But the evidence doesn't care what people believe. The documentation doesn't change based on who's sleeping with whom. And by the time this is over, your father's opinion won't matter to anyone except his cellmate. The interview aired at 6 o'clock that evening, interrupting regular programming with a special report. Elena watched it from the safe house living room. Dominic beside her, and Angela hovering nearby with tea, and the kind of quiet support that came from years of managing crises. Seeing herself on screen was surreal. This woman who looked composed and credible, who spoke clearly about corruption and betrayal, who cried at appropriate moments but didn't fall apart. She barely recognized herself. Within 20 minutes of the broadcast ending, Elena's phone started ringing. The old phone, the one she'd turned off days ago, but hadn't been able to throw away. She powered it on and watched as notifications flooded in. Messages from friends, former colleagues, people she hadn't spoken to in years. Most were supportive. Some were vicious. A few were clearly from her father's allies, calling her a liar and a traitor. And then, at 7:43, a text from her mother. "Your father is on his way to get you. Please, Elena, please, just come home. We can fix this. We can make this right. Just come home." Elena stared at the message, her throat tight. This was what she'd been waiting for. Some acknowledgement from her mother, some sign that Patricia Hart was more than just an extension of her husband's will. But even now, even after everything, her mother's concern was about fixing the situation, making things right, restoring the status quo. Not about whether Elena was safe or happy or free. "He's coming," Elena said, showing Dominic the text. "I know. He left Miami 40 minutes ago. I've been tracking his car since he got on I-95. Dominic stood up, rolling his shoulders like a fighter preparing for a bout. "Security is ready. Angela has the police on speed dial in case he tries anything stupid, and you have a choice to make." "What choice?" "Whether you want to see him, whether you want to hear what he has to say, or whether you want me to turn him away at the gate and handle this without you." Dominic's voice was gentle. "Either option is valid, Elena. You don't owe him a conversation just because he's your father." Elena thought about that. About Richard Hart arriving in his expensive car with his expensive lawyers, expecting his daughter to fold under the weight of his authority the way she'd folded her entire life. She thought about all the times she'd swallowed her own opinions to keep the peace, all the times she'd made herself smaller to fit into the spaces her family had carved out for her. And she thought about the woman in that interview, the one who'd looked straight at the camera and said that walking away was possible, that you didn't have to accept the life other people planned for you. I'll see him, she said, but on my terms, in a place where I feel safe, with witnesses present. He doesn't get to intimidate me in private anymore. That's my girl. Dominic caught himself just like he had before. Sorry, I know what you meant. And this time, Elena found she didn't mind the possessive phrase. It felt different coming from Dominic than it had from Marcus. Less about ownership and more about partnership, belonging. Something she couldn't quite name, but that felt honest in a way nothing else in her life had felt for a very long time. Richard Hart arrived at 8:15 with an entourage that would have been impressive if it wasn't so desperate. 2 lawyers, a security guard who was clearly just for show, and Patricia Hart looking small and terrified in the passenger seat of the lead car. Dominic's security held them at the gate, while Angela went out to explain the conditions. Richard could come in, alone, unarmed, and under video surveillance. If he agreed, he could speak with his daughter. If he didn't, he could leave. Elena watched through the window as her father's face turned red with rage, as he gestured angrily at the security guards, as her mother touched his arm and said something that made him pause. Finally, reluctantly, he nodded. They met in the living room, with Dominic standing near the door and Angela positioned by the security monitors. Richard Hart looked older than Elena remembered, gray around the temples, lines around his eyes that hadn't been there a month ago. Or maybe they'd always been there and she'd just been too conditioned to worship him to notice. Elena. Her name came out rough, like he was forcing it past some obstruction in his throat. Thank God. When I saw that interview, when I heard what you were saying, sweetheart, what have they done to you? They haven't done anything to me. I made my own choices. Choices? Richard's laugh was bitter. You call being manipulated by a career criminal a choice? You call destroying your family's reputation and livelihood a choice? Elena, look at me. Really look at me. I'm your father. I've loved you since the day you were born. Do you honestly think I would ever do anything to hurt you? The question hung in the air, and Elena realized with startling clarity that her father genuinely believed what he was saying. He'd compartmentalized so thoroughly, justified his actions so completely, that he truly didn't see the contradiction between loving his daughter and selling her to secure a business deal. I think you love me the way you understand love, Elena said carefully, as something conditional, something that requires I play a specific role in the story you've written about your life. But that's not real love, Dad. Real love doesn't trade people like assets. Real love doesn't try to have someone committed to a mental institution because they discovered the truth. The truth? Richard's voice rose. You want to talk about truth? The truth is that everything I built, everything our family has, I built for you and your sister, to give you opportunities, security, a future, and you repay me by conspiring with my enemies to destroy it all. I didn't conspire with anyone. I just stopped lying about what I saw. You saw what this man, Richard jabbed a finger toward Dominic, wanted you to see. He manipulated you, Elena. Took advantage of your emotional state after the wedding, fed you half-truths and distortions until you couldn't tell reality from paranoia. And now you're so deep in his influence that you actually believe you're making independent choices. Elena felt anger flare hot in her chest. You want to talk about manipulation? Let's talk about how you arranged my entire engagement without telling me it was a business transaction. Let's talk about how you knew Marcus was using me and you let it happen because it benefited Hart Shipping. Let's talk about how you tried to gaslight me into thinking I was crazy when I started asking questions about where all that money was really coming from. I protected you. I kept you safe from the realities of how business works in this city. You made me complicit in crimes I didn't even know were being committed. Elena stood up, her whole body shaking. You used my name on shipping manifests, Dad. My signature on documents authorizing cargo I never saw. If Dominic hadn't helped me understand what was happening, I would have ended up in prison alongside you, and you would have let that happen to protect yourself. That's not true. I would never. You already did. The moment you tried to have me declared incompetent, the moment you told the media I was having a breakdown, you chose your empire over your daughter. So don't stand there and tell me about love when what you really mean is ownership. Richard's face had gone purple, veins standing out on his forehead. You ungrateful, do you have any idea what you've done? The FBI has frozen everything. The company is worthless. 20 years of work gone because my own daughter decided to play hero with a criminal who's using her for his own purposes. Then maybe you shouldn't have built your empire on crimes that couldn't survive daylight, Elena shot back. Maybe you should have been the father you claimed to be instead of the criminal you actually are. For a moment, she thought he might hit her. His hand actually rose, curled into a fist, before Dominic moved with frightening speed to position himself between them. I think you should leave now, Dominic said, his voice deadly quiet. You. Richard turned his rage on Dominic. You did this. You poisoned her against her own family. You filled her head with lies because you wanted to take down the Chens, and you didn't care who you destroyed in the process. I gave her information and options. What she did with them was entirely her choice. Dominic didn't raise his voice, but authority radiated from him like heat. And if you had ever actually listened to your daughter, instead of trying to control her, you'd know that Elena doesn't need anyone to poison her against you. You managed that all by yourself. Richard lunged forward, but Dominic's security was faster. Within seconds, they had Richard's arms restrained, his face still twisted with fury. Let me go! I'm taking my daughter home, and there's nothing you can do to stop me. She's 28 years old, Dominic said. She's not property you can reclaim. She's a person who's choosing not to go with you. And if you try to force her, you'll be adding kidnapping to the list of charges you're already facing. Elena stepped forward, looking her father in the eye for what she suspected might be the last time. I'm not coming home, Dad. I'm not going back to being the daughter you wanted me to be. I'm not signing anything, supporting any defense strategy, or standing by your side while you try to lie your way out of this. You're on your own. Something in Richard's expression cracked. The rage drained away, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. Elena, please. I'm your father. You can't just abandon me. You abandoned me the moment you decided I was worth less than a shipping contract. Elena's voice was steady now, clear and final. Goodbye, Dad. Security escorted Richard Hart out of the house. Through the window, Elena watched him get back into his car, watched her mother try to comfort him, watched the small convoy pull away down the private road. She waited to feel something, grief, maybe, or relief, but all she felt was empty. Are you okay? Dominic asked quietly. I don't know. Ask me tomorrow, or next year, or whenever I finally process what just happened. The fallout was swift and brutal. Richard Hart was formally arrested 3 days later on charges ranging from conspiracy to commit fraud to human trafficking. Marcus Chen, faced with overwhelming evidence and the testimony of multiple witnesses, took a plea deal that would put him in federal prison for 15 years. Vanessa disappeared to Europe, reportedly staying with family friends in Switzerland while the scandal died down. Patricia Hart filed for divorce and issued a statement through her attorney expressing shock and betrayal at her husband's activities, claiming she'd had no knowledge of the criminal enterprise. Elena didn't know whether to believe that or not, and after a few sleepless nights, she decided it didn't matter. Her mother had made her choices, just like everyone else. They would all have to live with the consequences. The favor Dominic asked for came 6 weeks later, on a Thursday afternoon when Elena was finally starting to feel like she could breathe again. They were having coffee on the terrace of the safe house, which had gradually become less of a hiding place and more of a home, when he brought it up. I need to call in that favor, he said without preamble. Elena's stomach tightened. What do you need? A date to a charity gala, black tie, very boring speeches, approximately 4 hours of schmoozing with Miami's elite, who all think I'm either dangerous or fascinating or both. He paused. And I need you to come with me as my partner, not my employee or my witness or my strategic asset, just as someone who wants to be there. Elena stared at him. That's the favor? After everything? After all the resources you've spent protecting me, all the risks you've taken, you want me to go to a party with you? I want you to choose to go to a party with me. There's a difference. Dominic set down his coffee cup, not quite meeting her eyes. The truth is, Elena, I could ask you for information about your father's remaining assets. I could ask you to testify in cases that have nothing to do with Hart shipping. I could ask for 100 different things that would benefit me strategically. But what I actually want is to walk into that gala with you on my arm and know that you're there because you want to be, not because you owe me something. Why does that matter? Because somewhere in the last 6 weeks, this stopped being a transaction for me. And I need to know if it stopped being a transaction for you too, or if I've been reading this whole thing wrong. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. She thought about the last 6 weeks, the late-night conversations about everything and nothing, the way Dominic had gradually let his walls down enough for her to see the man behind the crime boss facade, the strange domesticity that had developed between them in this house that was supposed to be temporary. She thought about the way her pulse quickened when he walked into a room, the way his rare smiles felt like victories, the way she'd started thinking of we instead of I, without even noticing the transition. It stopped being a transaction, she said quietly. Probably around the time you held my hand before the interview and told me I was stronger than I thought. Maybe even before that. Dominic finally looked at her, and the vulnerability in his expression stole her breath. So is that a yes to the gala? On one condition. Name it. After the gala, we figure out what this actually is. Not the strategy, not the protection arrangement, not the business relationship. This, us, whatever we're becoming. Elena reached across the table and took his hand. Because I'm tired of transactions and arrangements and relationships that are really just contracts in disguise. If we're going to do this, I want it to be real. Dominic's fingers tightened around hers. I can do real. I'm not sure I'm any good at it, but I can try. That's all I'm asking. The gala was exactly as boring as Dominic had promised, full of wealthy people making small talk about vacation homes and stock portfolios while pretending to care about whatever charity was being honored. But walking into that ballroom with Dominic beside her, feeling the weight of curious stares and whispered speculation, Elena discovered she didn't care what anyone thought. She'd survived worse than gossip. She'd walked through fire and come out the other side with her integrity intact and her future finally her own. When someone asked how they met, Elena smiled and said, "He found me at my lowest point and showed me I was stronger than I thought I was." When someone asked if the rumors were true, if she was really involved with Dominic Vale, Elena looked at the man who'd given her back her power and said, "Yes, and it's the first honest thing that's happened to me in years." 6 months later, Hart Shipping was liquidated to pay restitution to victims of the trafficking operation. Richard Hart was sentenced to 22 years in federal prison. Marcus Chen was serving his sentence at a minimum security facility in North Carolina, by all accounts a model prisoner who spent most of his time in the library avoiding the general population. Elena had started a non-profit organization helping women escape abusive relationships, funded partially by the restitution settlement and partially by anonymous donations from a source she suspected was Dominic but had never confirmed. She'd given dozens of interviews, spoken at conferences, become the face of a movement she'd never intended to start, but had discovered she was perfectly suited to lead. And Dominic, complicated, dangerous, surprisingly tender Dominic, had gradually transformed from her protector into her partner in every sense of the word. They had dinner together every night they were in the same city. They argued about politics and books, and whether pineapple belonged on pizza. They built something that looked nothing like the transaction that had brought them together, and everything like the relationship Elena had always wanted but never knew how to ask for. On a cool evening in December, almost a year after Elena had walked away from her wedding, she stood on the balcony of the penthouse apartment she now shared with Dominic and looked out at the Miami skyline. The city glittered below her, vast and indifferent to the small dramas playing out in its streets. Somewhere down there, her father was sitting in a cell. Her mother was rebuilding a life in Palm Beach. Vanessa was still in Europe, reportedly engaged to a banker from Geneva. And here, in this space above it all, Elena Hart had finally found the thing she'd been searching for without knowing its name. Freedom. Real freedom. The kind that came from choosing your own path, even when that path led somewhere unexpected and occasionally terrifying. Dominic came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" "That a year ago I thought my life was over, and it was just not in the way I thought." "Any regrets?" Elena thought about that question, really considered it. Did she regret the pain of walking away, the loss of her family, the public scrutiny and the whispered speculation about her relationship with a known criminal? Did she regret any of the choices that had led her here, to this moment, to this man, to this life she'd built from the ashes of the one that had burned? "No," she said finally. "No regrets. Not even one." "Good. Dominic pressed a kiss to her temple. Because I have something to ask you, and I need you to know it's not a transaction or a favor or any kind of strategic arrangement. Elena turned in his arms, her heart suddenly racing. What is it? He pulled a small box from his pocket, and Elena's breath caught. But when he opened it, she found herself laughing, because inside wasn't a ring, but a key. It's to a house, Dominic said, smiling at her reaction. In Coconut Grove, far enough from my business dealings that you'll have privacy. Close enough to your nonprofit that you won't spend your life in traffic. 3 bedrooms, a garden, space for the life I hope we're going to build together. No contracts, no arrangements, no strings attached. Just a home, if you want it. If I want it? Elena took the key, feeling its weight in her palm. Dominic Vale, are you asking me to live with you? I'm asking you to build a life with me. The living together part just seemed like a logical first step. His expression turned serious. But I mean it, Elena. No obligations, no hidden agendas. Just 2 people who found each other in the worst possible circumstances and somehow managed to make something good out of it. If you're not ready, if you need more time, I can wait. I'm very patient when it matters. Elena looked at this man who'd given her back her power, who'd stood beside her when her whole world collapsed, who'd asked for a single date to a party as his favor, and then proceeded to build a partnership that was more honest than any relationship she'd ever had. And she realized that for the first time in her entire life, she wasn't being asked to trade one cage for another. She was being offered a choice, real, genuine, terrifying choice, and the freedom to make it entirely on her own terms. I don't need more time, she said, closing her fingers around the key. I choose this. I choose us. I choose the life we're going to build together, whatever that looks like. Dominic pulled her close, and when he kissed her, Elena tasted possibility and promise, and the strange, unexpected sweetness of a future that belonged entirely to her. The woman who'd sat freezing in a parking garage in a destroyed wedding dress had been looking for rescue. But the woman standing on this balcony, wrapped in the arms of a complicated man who'd shown her that love could be both fierce and gentle, had learned something far more valuable. She didn't need rescuing. She never had. She just needed the courage to save herself, and someone willing to stand beside her while she learned how. And as the Miami night stretched out around them, full of possibility and starlight and the promise of tomorrow, Elena Hart finally understood what freedom felt like. It felt like coming home.